Coffee clears the fog. You know the feeling. You wake up slow, your thoughts are scattered, everything has a kind of gray fuzz on it, and you shuffle to the kitchen and you make the cup and you wrap your hands around it, and after a while something in you shifts. The gray lifts. The world comes back into focus. I've felt it 1,000 times. I drink the stuff myself, and the whole world has decided, quietly, without ever really arguing about it, that this is settled. That coffee is the thing that switches your nervous system back on in the morning. That this is just how it works, and there's nothing more to say. That is completely wrong, and I think I can show you why. Let me give you one number to hold on to, and then I'll spend a long time earning it. In a careful study, a proper randomized controlled trial, they took people and they put them under real stress, the kind that makes a stress hormone called cortisol come pouring into the blood. And in the ordinary group, the cortisol climbed by more than 70%. That's a big jump. That's your body shouting. Now they took another group, put them under the very same stress, but they did one small thing differently. They put something cold on those people's faces. And in that group, the cortisol went up by less than 1%. Same stress, same task, same fear. One little cold touch on the skin of the face, and the whole hormonal storm just, more or less, didn't happen. So here is the thing I want you to chew on tonight, slowly, while you drift off. Coffee is not resetting your nervous system. It is borrowing against it. It's taking out a loan, and the thing that actually resets your nervous system is older than coffee, older than agriculture, older than mammals. It fires in less than 30 seconds, and it's been sitting there in your own face your entire life, waiting, and almost nobody ever uses it on purpose. But I don't want you to believe me yet. That would be no fun. And worse, it would be no good. Because if you just take my word for it, you haven't learned anything. You've only swapped one belief you didn't examine for another belief you didn't examine. And that's not how you find out what's true. So I'm going to do the opposite of convince you quickly. I'm going to build the case for coffee first. I'm going to make coffee look brilliant. I'm going to make you feel, in your bones, that of course coffee is the answer. That the science of it is beautiful and clean and basically finished. And only after coffee is standing there looking unbeatable am I going to start, very gently, knocking on the walls to see what's hollow. So let's begin the way an honest person begins. Let's give coffee its due, and let me tell you, coffee deserves a lot of due. Because the way caffeine works is genuinely one of the prettiest little mechanisms in all of your body chemistry. It is not magic. It is not vague. We actually understand it, down to the shape of the molecule, and that's rare and it's lovely. So let's enjoy it. Here's the first thing you should know, and it's almost the whole story. Caffeine is fast. When you drink that cup, the caffeine doesn't dawdle. 99% of the dose, 99 out of every 100 molecules gets absorbed into your body within about 45 minutes. That's quick for a drug you swallowed, and the peak, the moment when the caffeine in your blood is at its very highest, arrives somewhere between 15 minutes and 2 hours after you drink it, depending on you, depending on your stomach, depending on whether you had breakfast. So within an hour, give or take, coffee is fully on the scene. That's a strong alibi. That's coffee saying, look, I show up reliably, and I show up soon. Hold that thought, because later I'm going to come back to that word soon and I'm going to take it apart, but for now, give coffee the point. It's a fair point. Now, to understand what the caffeine does once it's there, I have to introduce you to the real main character of this whole story. And it isn't caffeine at all. It's a little molecule your own brain makes, all day long, every day of your life, whether you want it to or not. It's called adenosine. And adenosine is in a way the most honest chemical in your head, because all it's really doing is keeping count. Let me tell you what it counts. Your brain is a busy place. It's burning fuel every second, running its billions of little cells, firing and resting and firing again, doing the enormous invisible work of being you. And whenever cells do work like that, they use up a kind of energy currency, and the leftover, the ash from that fire, includes adenosine. So the longer you've been awake, The longer your brain has been burning, the more adenosine piles up. It just accumulates, hour after hour after hour. And adenosine has a job. It goes and it settles onto certain little docking points on your nerve cells, and when enough of it settles, it whispers a single message, over and over, gently, insistently. The message is, you are tired. Slow down. It's time to rest. That's what sleepiness is in large part. It isn't some vague mood. It's a molecule reaching a certain level. Adenosine is your body's little hourglass, and by evening the sand has mostly run down, and you feel it, that heaviness behind the eyes, that's adenosine sitting on its docks and saying, enough now, lie down. And here's the thing, it's supposed to do that. It's not the enemy. It's the count. It's the true reading of how much fire you've burned. When you finally do sleep, your brain, among all the other beautiful things it does at night, clears the adenosine away, empties the hourglass so that in the morning the count is low again and you feel fresh. That's the natural cycle. Fill it up all day, empty it out all night. Honest bookkeeping. Now watch what caffeine does, because this is the clever part and I want to be completely fair to it. Caffeine does not clear the adenosine. Caffeine does not empty the hourglass. Caffeine does not reach in and remove one single molecule of the stuff. That's the first surprise, and most people who drink coffee every morning of their lives have no idea. What caffeine actually does is much sneakier. Caffeine happens to be shaped by pure chemical accident almost exactly like adenosine, close enough that it fits the same docks. Those docks, by the way, the ones adenosine settles on, come in a couple of types, and the two that matter here go by the plain names A1 and A2A. And caffeine goes and it plugs itself into those docks. It fits the lock perfectly. But it doesn't turn the key. That's the whole trick. It's a counterfeit key. It slides in, it fills the slot, it fits like it was made for it, and then it just sits there and does nothing. It sends no message. It doesn't say you are tired. It doesn't say anything at all. It just occupies the space so that the real adenosine, the honest molecule carrying the true message, can't get in. The docks are full of dummies, and so the tiredness signal can't be delivered. You don't feel the sleepiness, not because the sleepiness is gone, but because the messenger has been locked out of the mailbox. And you feel great. You feel sharp. The fog lifts, exactly like I told you at the start, and it's real. You're not imagining it. And to make it even more convincing, we can watch it happen in the blood. In one careful experiment, they gave people a standard little cup of strong coffee, an espresso, and they measured the caffeine in the bloodstream, and it jumped tenfold. Tenfold. It went from a low background level, a couple of micromoles per liter, up to about 21 micromoles per liter within 2 hours. So this is not subtle. The stuff floods in, it floods those docking points, it locks out the tiredness, and you get your bright, clear morning. It's fast, it's dramatic, we can measure every step of it, and it works. So there's coffee's case, and I've made it as strong as I honestly can, and I hope you're feeling pretty convinced right now, because that's exactly where I want you. I want you comfortable. I want you thinking, well, this Feynman fellow said he'd tear coffee down, but honestly it sounds pretty airtight to me. Fast absorption. A beautiful, well-understood mechanism. A real measurable flood of the drug doing a real measurable thing. What on earth could be wrong with it? And the answer is, nothing is wrong with any single fact I just told you. Every one of them is true. That's what makes this such a good puzzle. The trap isn't in the facts. The trap is in a question I very carefully did not ask. I told you caffeine locks the tiredness out. I never told you where the tiredness goes while it's locked out. I told you adenosine keeps counting. I never asked what happens to all the adenosine that keeps piling up behind that locked door hour after hour, while you sit there feeling wonderful. That's the loose thread. And when we pull on it, slowly, the whole beautiful picture is going to start to come apart in your hands. Let me pour us a picture of what's really happening behind that locked door, because it's stranger and quieter than you'd guess. All day long, in the ordinary business of being alive, your brain cells are burning fuel. Every thought, every twitch, every daydream costs a little energy, and the spent fuel leaves behind a kind of ash. One of the pieces of that ash is the very molecule we've been talking about, the tiredness molecule. It builds up gently, like sediment settling on the bottom of a slow river. And the more of it that settles, the more of it drifts over to those little docking sites on your nerve cells and says, softly, it's getting late, ease off, slow down. That's not a malfunction. That's the body keeping honest books. The tiredness is a true statement about how much living you've done since you last slept. Now here is the thing I hid from you. When you drink the coffee, you do not erase a single grain of that sediment. Not one. The counterfeit key slides into the docking site and holds the door shut, and the real molecule, the honest one, comes drifting up and finds no room at the inn. So what does it do? It doesn't vanish. It doesn't get politely swept out to sea. It waits. It keeps piling up outside the door. And meanwhile, your body, seeing all these locks occupied, seeing all this apparent demand, does the sensible thing a factory would do when the loading dock looks busy. It builds more docking sites. It adds more locks to the wall. So now you have more doors than you started with, and behind every one of them a growing crowd of the tiredness molecule, tapping its foot, waiting for the fraud to wear off. Sit with that for a moment, because it's the whole secret of the crash. The coffee was never a broom. It was a curtain. You pulled the curtain across the window so you couldn't see how dark it had gotten outside, and you told yourself, look how bright it is in here. But the sun kept going down the whole time. And a curtain, unlike a sunrise, comes down all at once. When the last of the counterfeit keys finally gets carried off by your liver, all those doors swing open in the same few minutes, and the crowd that's been gathering for 5, 6, 7 hours pours through every one of them at the same instant. You don't get the tiredness you would have had. You get the tiredness you would have had, plus interest, arriving all together into a wall that now has more locks than it did this morning. That's why the crash can feel worse than the plain tiredness ever would have. You didn't skip the bill, you ran a tab. And the molecule that keeps the books never forgets a single entry. I find something almost beautiful in how fair it is. There's no trick nature is playing on you here, no cruelty, it's just arithmetic. The debt was always going to be collected. Coffee only changes when, and it changes it in the worst possible direction. From a gentle slope, you could have walked down into a cliff you fall off. And notice, please, that everything I told you in praise of coffee is still true. It really is absorbed almost completely inside 3/4 of an hour. It really does reach its peak in the blood somewhere between 1/4 of an hour and 2 hours. The espresso really does raise the drug in your bloodstream about tenfold, from a whisper to a shout. None of that was a lie. The lie was one of omission. Mine, on purpose, so you could feel the floor give way the same instant the crowd comes through the doors. But let me be a fair prosecutor, because a good case is never built on one charge. I could rest here on the debt and the crash, and you might say, fine, so I'll drink less, or I'll drink it earlier, and we'd have a tidy little lesson. I don't want a tidy little lesson. I want to keep pulling threads, because there are 2 more hiding in this cup, and they are both quieter and more surprising than the first. Here is the second one. You would think, wouldn't you, that a stimulant works by revving up the part of your nervous system that handles alarm and effort. The branch that makes your palms sweat and your heart pound when a dog lunges at the fence. That's the branch we call sympathetic, the one that carries the body's alarm signals out along the nerves to the muscles in the vessels. Common sense says coffee must be pouring fuel on that fire. Common sense is so sure of this that most people have never even thought to check. Well, somebody checked. Somebody put fine electrodes in and actually measured the traffic of alarm signals running out to the muscles, before and after a single standard espresso, and compared it against the same measurement after a plain glass of water. And the result is upside down from what everyone expects. After the water, the alarm traffic climbed. It went up to something like 128% of where it started. After the espresso, the coffee, the thing we all call a stimulant, the alarm traffic went down to about 91% of baseline. Down. The coffee quieted the very nerves you were sure it was firing up, and it did so more than plain water did. Read that twice, slowly in the dark. The drug we reach for to feel wired actually lowered the outbound alarm signals along the sympathetic nerves. So then where does the famous little rise in blood pressure come from? The one every doctor's office will show you after coffee. It doesn't come from the nerves shouting louder. It comes from the drug going straight to the walls of your blood vessels and blocking those same docking sites there out in the plumbing, which makes the vessels tighten on their own, without any order from the nervous system at all. The resistance in the pipework went up to about 120% of baseline after coffee, against only 107 after water. And here's the little wink at the end of it. The heart rate after coffee was actually a touch lower than after water. 62 beats a minute against 64. The stimulant slowed the heart slightly and hushed the alarm nerves and raised the pressure by squeezing the pipes directly. That is not the portrait of a clean wake-up signal. That is a portrait of a chemical reaching into 3 or 4 different rooms of the house and rearranging the furniture in each one, some of it in directions you'd never have guessed. And now the third thread, which is the one I find the most quietly damning of all, because it touches the very reason people say they need the cup. They say, I drink it to feel calm and capable, to take the edge off the morning. Let's ask what the drug actually does to the body's own edge, to its stress chemistry. There's a hormone, a real one, that your body releases when it decides the situation calls for stress, and it's called cortisol. It's not a villain. In the morning, it's your friend. In the first half hour to hour after you open your eyes, your body deliberately sends up a surge of it. A natural wave meant to lift you out of sleep and get you moving. That wave is supposed to crest and then come back down on its own, a tide going out, leaving you awake and level. Now watch what the coffee does when you pour it onto that already rising tide. A modest dose, a few milligrams for every kilogram you weigh, pushes the messenger hormone that summons cortisol up by roughly a third above what you'd see with no drug at all, and it pushes the cortisol itself up by something like 30% above placebo. 30% more stress hormone layered on top of a wave that was already high. And if you drink it in that first window after waking, when your own tide is near its peak, you are not taking the edge off. You are stacking your own surge on top of nature's surge, building the wave higher than either would have gone alone. That's why some people find that if they simply wait an hour and a half, 2 hours until their own morning tide has gone back out, and only then drink the coffee, it treats them far more kindly. They stopped pouring the drug into the crest and started pouring it into the trough. So hold all 3 of these in your hand at once, gently, the way you'd hold 3 stones you picked up on a beach. The drug runs a tab against your tiredness and hands you the bill with interest. The drug quiets the alarm nerves you thought it was firing and squeezes your pipes directly instead. And the drug raises your stress hormone by a third at the very moment you swore it was calming you down. Every one of those is true, and every one of them is the opposite of the simple story we started with, the gospel of the morning cup. I told you the trap wasn't in the facts. Now you can feel where it really was. It was in believing that one clean word, stimulant, could describe something reaching into 4 rooms and doing 4 different half-contradictory things in each. And I have said almost nothing yet about how fast any of this happens, which turns out to be the softest spot in coffee's whole alibi. Because the very best coffee can do on its very best morning is start to reach you in about a quarter of an hour, and it may take up to 2 hours to truly crest. Keep that number, a quarter of an hour, sitting in the back of your mind like a coat on a hook. Because there is another way to reach into your nervous system, a much older way, one your body already carries, and it does its work not in a quarter of an hour, but in the first breath, in the first few seconds. And to understand why it's so fast, we have to leave the coffee cup on the table and walk back to a cold room in London, a very long time ago, where a curious man was about to watch a heart do something that no book had yet bothered to write down. So picture the room. It is not warm, this room. It is London in the 1780s, a time when a man who wanted to know how a body worked simply had to go and look, because almost nobody had bothered to write it down properly. The gentleman's name was Edmund Goodwin, and he was worrying at a very old question, the question of drowning. What actually happens in the machinery of an animal when the breathing stops and the water takes over? And so he did the plain, patient, slightly grim thing that the science of that century demanded. He took an air-breathing creature, and he put it under cold water, and he watched. Now you might expect, as almost anyone would expect, that a body deprived of air would panic in every fiber, that the heart, robbed of its oxygen, would race faster and faster, thrashing to make up the difference the way a man running out of money spends quicker in a fright. That is the sensible guess. It is the guess I would have made. And it is wrong. Because what Goodwin saw, and what got written into the record for the first time in about the year 1786, was the opposite. The heart did not gallop. The heart slowed. It went quiet. As though the animal, at the very moment you would think it should be most frantic, had instead received some calm instruction from a part of itself it had never consulted before. The heart slowed down on purpose. Sit with how strange that is. The body is being starved of the one thing it cannot live without, and its response is not to hurry but to hush. Almost 100 years later, a Frenchman by the name of Paul Bert, around 1870, went back to this and filled in a great deal more of the picture, and between the two of them a fact settled into place that has never been dislodged since. Every air-breathing creature with a backbone that anyone has ever thought to test carries this trick, every one. The fish do not need it, of course. But the things that left the water and learned to breathe the sky, the seals and the whales that later went back, the ducks, the dogs, the mice, you, me, the baby asleep in the next room, all of us. It is a piece of equipment so old it predates our leaving the sea, or rather it is the equipment that made leaving and returning survivable at all. And here is the first thing that ought to make you set down whatever certainty you had about coffee. This response, this quieting, did not need the animal to be a clever diver. It did not need training. It did not need willpower. It did not need the animal to understand a single thing about what was happening to it. It came for free, built in, waiting. Now the early observers thought the whole business was about the holding of the breath. That seemed obvious. Stop the air, and the heart responds to the missing air. Reasonable, but it turns out to be only a piece of the truth, and not even the biggest piece. Because if you simply hold your breath, sitting comfortably in a warm, dry chair right now, and you time your pulse honestly, you will find the effect is faint. A little slowing maybe, a whisper, nothing that would impress anybody. But add the water. Add cold water on the face, and the whisper becomes a command. The two together, the held breath and the cold wet skin of the face, produce a slowing far deeper than either one alone. Which is a peculiar thing when you think about it, because it means the body is not only listening to the chemistry of the blood, to the oxygen running low. It is listening to the face, to the skin, to the temperature of the water against the cheeks and the brow and the bridge of the nose. The face is doing the reporting, and the heart is obeying the report. And if you want the cleanest proof that this is really about the face and not about the drama of suffocating, look at the youngest among us. A baby less than a year into this world does not need to hold its breath at all. It does not need to do anything on purpose, and of course it cannot. You have only to bring cold water to that small face, and the whole reflex unfurls. Complete, the heart settling, the body arranging itself, all of it, from nothing but the touch of cold on the skin. The infant beats the adult at this, because the infant is not cluttered with second guessing. The wiring is fresh and the wiring simply works. Somewhere in growing up we bury this thing under a mountain of thinking, but we never lose it. It is down there still, under the coffee and the worry and the noise, waiting for the cold to call it. So now the honest question is, how? How does a splash of cold water on the skin of your face reach all the way into the beating of your heart and tell it gently to ease off? Because notice, this is not a message the way we usually think of messages. You did not decide it. You did not feel it coming. There was no thought, no choice, no little voice saying slow the heart. The face got cold, and the heart obeyed, and the whole transaction happened below the floorboards of your awareness entirely. To follow it, we have to go down to something almost impossibly small. We have to go into the very tips of the nerves that live in the skin of your face and find the actual object that first notices the cold. Because there is one. It is not a vague thing, not a mood, not an impression. It is a specific piece of machinery, a tiny gate built into the ending of a nerve, and it has a job so precise you could almost set a thermometer by it. The people who study these things gave it a rather unlovely name, and I am not going to fuss over the letters and numbers of it. Call it the cold gate, a channel, a little door in the wall of the nerve cell. Most of the time this door sits shut. And what it is watching for, what it is built to answer to, is temperature. When the skin around it is warm, or even just cool, the door stays closed and stays quiet, and says nothing to anybody. But let the temperature at that spot fall past a certain line, down below roughly 25 degrees on the Celsius scale, which is to say cooler than a comfortable room, cool the way water from the cold tap is cool, and the door opens. That is the whole trick of it. It is a switch that is thrown not by pressure, not by light, not by a chemical, but by cold itself. The cold is the finger on the switch. And I want you to feel how clean that threshold is, because it explains something you may have noticed your whole life without ever asking about it. It explains why warm water does nothing. You can splash your face with warm water all morning and feel pleasant and feel refreshed in the ordinary way, but you will not trip this reflex, because the little door never opens. The temperature never crosses the line. Warm water is a knock on a door that stays shut, but cold tap water, ordinary cold water, the kind you can get from any faucet, the kind you could scoop from a cold stream, that water is already below the line, and the door swings wide the instant it lands. This is why the humble splash works and the luxurious warm wash does not. It is not about comfort. It is about crossing a number. There is even a second gate, deeper down, that only bothers to open for water colder still, the kind of cold that shades over into pain, and that one has its own line lower down around 17 degrees or so. But for our purposes, the first gate is the star, because plain cold water from the tap is exactly, almost as if it were designed for it, in the range that throws that switch. Now these gates are not sitting just anywhere. They are set into the endings of a particular family of nerves, thin ones, slender bare fibers without the fatty insulation the big fast nerves wear, and these little fibers gather up from all over the face and run back toward a junction, a kind of switchboard that serves the whole front of the head. This is the great sensory nerve of the face, the one that carries to your brain every feeling you have ever had of your own cheeks and lips and forehead, every itch and every kiss and every cold wind. And this is the beautiful part, the part that starts to knit the whole story together. It is exactly this facial nerve, this reporter of the face, that turns out to hold the first thread of a string that runs, stop by stop, all the way down into the oldest basement of your brain, and from there back out to the heart. The cold opens the gate. The gate wakes the thin nerve. The thin nerve carries the news inward. And where that news goes, and what answers it, is a road worth walking slowly, one landmark at a time, because every stop on it was placed there long before anything in you learned to want a cup of coffee in the morning. Let us walk that road now, slowly, the way you would walk a country lane at dusk when there is no reason to hurry and every fence post has a story. The news of the cold has entered the thin nerve of the face, and that nerve, like all the little threads that gather feeling from your skin, does not simply drift into the brain wherever it pleases. It reports to an office. Its cell bodies, the little swollen headquarters of these nerve fibers, sit clustered together in a knot tucked beside the base of the skull, and this knot is called the trigeminal ganglion. Think of it as a small post office where all the letters from the front of the face are collected before they are sent on. The word ganglion only means a swelling, a lump, a gathering place. That is all it is, a gathering place for the cell bodies of the nerves that feel your face. And it is here, in these little cells and in the fine bare endings that reach up from them into your skin, that the cold detectors themselves are built. The switch I told you about, the one that flips open when the temperature falls, it lives right here, in these thin unmyelinated fibers. The slow, quiet fibers with no fatty insulation on them. The ones that carry the dull news, the aches and the temperatures, rather than the sharp, fast news of a pinprick. So the letter is written at the skin, collected at the post office beside the skull, and now it must be carried inward. And where does it go? It goes down and it goes back into a part of you that you almost never think about and could not live for 1 minute without. It goes into the brainstem. Now the brainstem is a funny thing to describe, Because when people imagine the brain, they imagine that great wrinkled walnut, the folded gray cloak on top, the part that does your talking and your arithmetic and your worrying about tomorrow. That is the cortex, the newest and showiest part, the part that human beings are so proud of. But underneath it, down where the brain narrows and becomes a stalk before it turns into the spinal cord, there is a much older thing, a stem. And that stem runs the machinery that keeps you alive without ever asking your permission. Your breathing, your heartbeat, the tone of your blood vessels. The stem does not consult you about these. It would be a catastrophe if it did. Imagine having to remember to beat your own heart while you slept. The first place the news arrives, down in that stem, in the part called the medulla, the lowest bulb of the brainstem, right where the whole brain is about to become the cord that runs down your back, is a little region with a long Latin name that I will translate for you so it stops being frightening. Nucleus tractus solitarius, the nucleus of the solitary tract. A nucleus in the brain just means a cluster of nerve cells that work together, a little committee. And the solitary tract is the bundle of incoming fibers it listens to. So really it is nothing more than the listening committee for a certain lonely bundle of nerves. And what a committee it is, because into this one small quiet room in the floor of the brainstem pours the news from an astonishing amount of your body. The taste on your tongue reports here. The stretch of your lungs as they fill reports here. The pressure sensors in the walls of your great arteries, the ones that tell your body how hard the blood is pushing, they report here. This little room is one of the great sensory clearinghouses of the whole hidden machinery of the body. And now, riding in on the cold, comes the news from your face. The cheek has cabled the medulla. And the medulla is a very old and very serious operator who has been taking calls like this since long before there were people. Here is where the ordinary story would have you believe something must happen up in the thinking part, the cortex, the walnut. You feel the cold, you think about the cold, you decide something. But that is not what happens here at all, and this is the thing I most want you to carry with you into sleep tonight. The cortex is never consulted. Your opinion is not requested. The whole chain I am describing to you, from the skin of the face down to the beat of the heart, is what we call a reflex. And a reflex is a loop that closes down low, in the basement, without ever climbing the stairs to the office where you live. It is the same architecture in spirit as the jerk of your knee when the doctor taps it with his little rubber hammer. You do not decide to kick. You could not stop it if you tried very hard. The signal comes in, it turns around at a low station, and it goes back out. All before the part of you that says I decided to ever hears a word about it. So it is with the cold on the face. The listening committee in the medulla takes the call and, without waking you, without asking you, passes a note to the next room. And the next room is where the reply is written. Just a little way over in the same lowest bulb of the brainstem sits another cluster of cells, and these are not listeners, these are senders. They are the source of the great wandering nerve, the one the old anatomist named the vagus, from the Latin word for wandering, the same root that gives us the word vagabond, a wanderer with no fixed home. And it earned that name honestly. Because unlike the trigeminal nerve that keeps its business up in the face, the vagus goes rambling. It leaves the skull and it wanders down through the neck and into the chest, and it lays its soft fingers on the heart. And it goes on wandering down into the lungs and the stomach and the gut, touching everything. A single nerve that meddles in half the quiet business of staying alive. This is the 10th of the cranial nerves, the great parasympathetic highway, the nerve of rest and of digestion and of calm. And one of the very first places it reaches, one of its earliest stops on that long wander south, is the heart. Now I have to tell you exactly where on the heart it lays its hand, because it is not just anywhere. Up in the upper right chamber of the heart, in the wall of the right atrium, there is a little patch of specialized tissue, a small knot of cells that are not quite like the rest of the muscle. This patch is the sinoatrial node, and it is the heart's own metronome. It is the thing that decides all by itself, tick and then tick and then tick, setting the pace that all the rest of the muscle follows. The heart does not need the brain to beat. Take a heart out and give it what it needs, and it will go on keeping its own time, because the metronome is built right into it. But the vagus reaches down and rests its fingertip on that metronome, and when the vagus speaks, the metronome slows. That is what the wandering nerve does to the heart. It is the brake. It is the gentle hand that says, "Softly now, not so fast, take your time." So look at the whole road we have walked, all in one glance, now that we are standing at the far end of it. Cold water touches the face. A switch in the skin of the face flips open. The thin nerve of the face carries the news to its little post office by the skull. From there it runs into the lowest, oldest bulb of the brainstem, into the listening committee that takes calls from all over the body. The committee passes a note next door to the senders. The senders fire off the wandering nerve. The wandering nerve rambles down into the chest, lays its finger on the heart's own metronome, and the metronome slows. And nowhere at any point along that whole road did the thinking part of you get a vote. You did not decide to be calmer. Your face was made colder, and a machine older than your species reached in and eased the throttle, and only afterward, seconds afterward, did the you that lives upstairs even begin to notice that something in the chest had gone quiet. Count the stops on that road. The skin. The little post office by the skull. The listening room in the medulla. The sender's room beside it. The wandering nerve. The metronome in the heart. 6 landmarks, and the signal crosses all of them in less time than it takes you to draw a full breath. And I want you to hold that number against the number we spent the whole first part of the evening building. The 15 minutes, the 90 minutes, the 2 hours that the little counterfeit key in your coffee needs before it has even climbed into your blood in earnest. One road runs in seconds along wires that were laid down before your ancestors crawled out of the sea. The other road runs in minutes and hours through the slow chemistry of the gut and the liver and the bloodstream. They are not even the same kind of thing. It is like comparing the ring of a doorbell to the arrival of a letter posted across the country. And we have only just met the first of the 2 things this cold reflex does at once. Because slowing the heart, gentle as that is only half of what the cold sets in motion. And the other half runs in what seems at first like exactly the opposite direction. And to understand how one small splash can pull your body 2 ways at the same time, and call the result calm, we have to look at the second nerve entirely. The one that does not slow things down but tightens them, and how it comes to be marching in step with its own opposite. So let us follow that second nerve. It does not travel with the vagus. It belongs to the other great branch of your automatic machinery, the one we call sympathetic, and its usual reputation is the reputation of alarm. It is the nerve of the pounding chest and the dry mouth, the nerve that fires when a dog lunges at you in the street. You would think then that it has no business at all showing up in a moment we are calling calm. And yet here it is. When the cold hits your face, the sympathetic branch does not sit quietly. It sends its own command outward, down to the small muscles wrapped around your blood vessels. The little rings of muscle in the walls of the arteries out in your arms, your legs, your fingers, your skin. And it tells them to squeeze, to tighten, to narrow the pipes. Now think about what that means for a moment slowly, the way you would turn a stone over in your hand. You have one nerve telling your heart to ease off, to beat more gently, fewer times a minute, and at the very same instant you have another nerve telling the vessels far out in your body to clamp down. One says slow, the other says tighten. To anyone who learned that the body has an accelerator and a brake, and that you press only one at a time, this looks like nonsense. It looks like a driver standing on the gas and the brake together. And I remember how strange that seemed to me, that nature would build a reflex that appears to argue with itself. But it does not argue with itself. It is doing something rather clever, and once you see the clever thing, the paradox dissolves into ordinary good sense. Here is the picture. Imagine your body as a house in winter and the warm blood as the heat in that house. When the cold water lands on your face, your body makes a decision that has nothing to do with what you are thinking. It decides that oxygen has suddenly become precious and that it must be spent only where it matters most. And the 2 places that matter most, always without exception, are the brain and the heart. So the reflex does 2 things to protect that supply. It slows the heart, so the heart itself burns less. and it squeezes the outer vessels shut so the warm oxygen-rich blood is pulled in out of the arms and the legs and the skin and the fingers and gathered toward the center, toward the brain and the heart, the two rooms of the house you keep heated no matter what. The squeezing is not panic. The squeezing is rationing. It is the body closing the doors to the rooms it can afford to let go cold so that the important rooms stay warm and lit. And this is why the reflex can hold two opposite commands in its hands at once without dropping either. Slowing the heart and constricting the vessels are not fighting. They are two halves of one plan. The heart beats slower because it does not need to hurry. It does not need to hurry because the blood is being carefully herded to exactly where it is wanted, and nowhere else. The parasympathetic side and the sympathetic side, the branch of rest and the branch of alarm, are marching in step, and the step they are keeping is a step toward conservation. It is one of the very few moments in all of your physiology where both branches of the automatic nervous system pull at the same time, and the result is not chaos but a kind of poise. A held breath. A body gathering itself. There is a third thing happening too, quieter still, and it begins even before the heart has fully slowed. Deep on the left side of your belly sits an organ most people never think about, the spleen. Among its many jobs, it works as a small warehouse, a reserve tank holding a store of red blood cells that are not, at this moment, out doing their rounds. When the diving reflex takes hold and the body senses that oxygen is about to become dear, the spleen contracts. It squeezes itself like a sponge, and it releases that horde of red cells into the circulation. And red cells are the wagons that carry oxygen. So in one motion, the body has raised the number of oxygen-carrying wagons on its roads without you taking a single extra breath. The heart slows to spend less. The vessels tighten to spend wisely. The spleen empties its reserves to have more to spend. Three separate actions from three separate parts of you, all triggered by that one splash of cold, all aimed at the same single purpose, and all of them set going before your conscious mind has even finished registering that the water was cold. I want you to sit with how quantitative this all is, because it is easy to hear words like slow and tighten and let them stay vague, and the real story is not vague at all. When researchers took people and immersed their faces in water at about 8 to 10 degrees on the Celsius scale, cold but nowhere near freezing, cold like a mountain stream in spring, they watched the heart rate fall by a striking amount. On average, the peak slowing came to nearly 33% below where the heart had been resting. Put that into plain heartbeats. A person sitting quietly beforehand, ticking along at around 79 beats a minute, would drop to a minimum somewhere near 53 beats a minute. That is not a subtle nudge. That is your heart shedding roughly a quarter to a third of its pace and doing it within the first half minute, from nothing more than cold water on the skin of the face. No pill could ask the heart for that and be obeyed so quickly. And notice, this is why it must be the face, and cold, and not just any of the pieces on their own. If you simply hold your breath, sitting in a warm room, dry, the heart slows only a little. A modest thing. You would hardly notice it. The breath holding alone is the weaker partner. It is the cold wetness on the face that turns a whisper into a command. Put the two together, the held breath and the cold water on the face, and the reflex arrives in its full strength. The face is doing the heavy lifting, because the face is where those cold-sensing nerve endings are packed most densely and wired most directly to the brainstem. And there is something almost tender in the fact that the very youngest among us do not even need the two pieces together. In a baby under a year old, the cold water on the face alone, with no deliberate breath holding at all, is enough to call up the whole reflex, complete. The infant does not have to know the trick. The infant is born already knowing it. The wiring is that old and that deep, which brings me back to the quarrel we have been having with the coffee cup, because I do not want you to lose the thread of the argument in all this lovely plumbing. We spent our first hour admiring caffeine, and it deserved the admiration. It is an elegant molecule with an elegant trick. But every good thing we said about it came with a clock attached. The blocking of the receptors, the borrowed alertness, the rise in vascular tone, all of it waits on absorption. Waits on the gut, waits on the blood to carry it, waits 15 minutes at the very best, and more often an hour or two before it reaches its peak. The cold reflex waits on nothing. It runs on a wire that was strung before the wait was even invented. 30 seconds against 90 minutes, a doorbell against a letter in the post, and it is not only faster, it runs in the opposite direction on the one measurement that may matter most for how you actually feel, which is the stress hormone we will come to know very well, cortisol. Hold that thought lightly for now, because we are going to put real numbers to it soon, and those numbers are the moment the whole case against coffee stops being a suspicion and becomes something close to proof. But feel the shape of it already. Caffeine, for all its charm, nudges your stress hormones upward. The cold on the face, in the careful studies, does not. It does something no stimulant does. It slows you and steadies you and sharpens you in the same instant, and it asks your stress chemistry to fall quiet rather than climb. So we have caught the cold reflex doing three things at once. Heart, vessels, spleen, all in the first breathless half minute, all through a pathway that never once asks your thinking brain for permission. And that last part, that this entire elaborate performance happens without consulting the part of you that you think of as you, is the thread I want to pull on next. Because it raises a question that ought to keep you awake, except that I am trying to do the opposite. If your cortex, the great wrinkled organ you use to read and worry and remember, is not invited to this reflex at all, then who exactly is giving the orders? Where does the decision get made? There is a quiet little room in the oldest part of your brain where all of this is decided in the dark, and I want to take you down into that room and show you the exact desk where the cold signal lands and the exact hand that signs the order to the heart. So come down with me now, past the folds of the cortex, past all the machinery of thought, into a place about the size of your thumb, sitting right where your skull meets your neck. This is the medulla, the lowest floor of the brain, the part that was already old when the first fish crawled onto land. It does not think. It does not remember. It has no opinions about your morning. It only keeps you alive, breath after breath, beat after beat, while the rest of you is busy being a person. And in this little basement there is a cluster of cells with a long and clumsy name, the nucleus tractus solitarius, and I want you to think of it simply as the desk where the mail arrives. Every whisper from your insides, the stretch of your lungs, the pressure in your great arteries, the sting of cold on your cheek, all of it lands here first, on this one crowded desk in the dark. So the cold signal comes racing in from your face, up along the trigeminal nerve, that thick cable of feeling that serves your forehead and your eyes and your cheeks. It arrives at the desk, and the clerk at this desk does not deliberate. It does not weigh the pros and cons. It simply reads the incoming note, cold, wet, face, and it turns and hands an order to the office right next door. That neighboring office has a name too, the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus, and this is the office that signs the letters to your heart. It picks up its pen. It writes a single instruction, slow down. And that letter goes out along the vagus nerve, the great wandering nerve, the 10th of the cranial nerves, the one that drifts down out of your skull and touches your heart and your lungs and your gut like a long, lazy river reaching every field it passes. The letter arrives at a little patch of tissue in the upper right of your heart, the sinoatrial node, the natural pacemaker, the drummer that sets the tempo for every beat you have ever had. And the drummer reads the order and eases off. The tempo falls. That is the whole chain. Face to desk to office to nerve to drummer. 4 or 5 stops and not one of them is upstairs. Your thinking brain is never even told it happened until it notices, a moment later, that everything has gone strangely still. I find that almost unbearably beautiful, and I mean that quietly, in a way that should let you sink deeper into the pillow rather than sit up. Because we spend our whole lives believing that we are the ones in charge. We believe that the seat of command is up behind the eyes in the part that talks. And here is this ancient reflex proving that some of the most important decisions your body ever makes are signed and sealed in a room you will never visit, by a clerk you will never meet, in total darkness, in less time than it takes to say the word cold. You splash the water. The order is already written. You had nothing to do with it. Now watch what the clerk does that is so clever, because this is where the whole thing turns strange. You might expect one order to go out. Slow the heart. Simple. But that is not what happens. Two orders leave that basement at nearly the same instant, and they seem to contradict each other. Down one line goes the parasympathetic command, the calming command, riding the vagus to the heart, telling the drummer to slow. But down another set of lines goes a sympathetic command, the branch we usually call the alarm system, the fight or flight machinery, and it does the opposite of calming. It squeezes. It reaches out to the blood vessels in your arms and your legs and the skin all over you, and it tightens them like a hand closing around a garden hose. And here is the puzzle that ought to stop you. The very same reflex is pushing the brake pedal and doing something fierce at the same time. How can one command from one little room be gentle and severe at once? The answer is that it is not confused at all. It knows exactly what it is doing, and it is doing something a submarine captain would recognize. When the water closes over your face, your body assumes, correctly or not, that you are diving. That air has just become the most precious thing in the world, and there may not be another breath for a while. So it makes a ruthless little economic decision in the dark. It decides that your fingers and your toes and your skin can wait. They can run on very little oxygen for now. And it squeezes their vessels shut so that the blood, the precious oxygen-carrying blood, gets pulled inward, hoarded, redirected to the only two customers that truly cannot wait even for a moment, the brain and the heart. And at the same time it slows the drummer, because a slower heart burns less fuel, and when you are rationing oxygen you want the engine idling, not racing. So the two orders are not fighting. They are partners in a single plan. Constrict the outskirts, spare the center, and turn the whole machine down low so the ration lasts. One hand on the throttle, one hand on the fuel line, both serving the same quiet purpose. And there is a third partner in this that we met a little while ago, working even faster than the heart. The spleen. That soft dark organ tucked under your left ribs, the one most people never think about at all, is a reservoir. It holds a stash of red blood cells in reserve, and when the diving order comes down it contracts, it wrings itself out like a sponge, and it pushes that reserve of oxygen carriers out into the flowing blood. So in the same breathless half-minute your body has slowed its own engine, sealed off its own outskirts, and quietly topped up its own fuel tank, all without a single conscious instruction from you. The whole thing is a rescue operation run by a staff you have never been introduced to. Now let me put a number on how deep this slowing can go, because the number is more dramatic than most people would ever guess. In careful studies where they immerse a person's face in water at around 8 to 10 degrees Celsius, cold but not painful, ordinary cold tap water, the heart does not slow by some polite little amount. In one controlled study, the peak slowing averaged nearly 33% below the resting rate. Think about what that means. A heart resting at around 79 beats a minute fell to somewhere near 53 beats at its lowest. In seconds. From nothing but cold water on the skin of the face. No drug, no needle, no waiting. A third of your heart rate simply melting away because an old clerk in the basement read a note and signed an order. And I want you to sit with the contrast, because this is the whole quarrel of tonight laid bare. Remember the coffee. Remember its long, patient timeline. It's 15 minutes at the very best before the caffeine even begins to reach its stride. It's full hour or two before it truly peaks in the blood. Its slow climb, its stress hormones rising, its debt quietly accumulating behind the blockade. And now set beside it the splash of cold water which has already reshaped your heartbeat before the coffee would have finished being swallowed. One works by chemistry, by molecules drifting through the bloodstream finding receptors, a slow tide of influence spreading through the body over many minutes. The other works by wire, by a signal running up a nerve at the speed nerves run to a switchboard and back down another nerve to the heart. Chemistry versus electricity. The postal surface versus the telegraph. And when you need something to happen now, in this very second, there is simply no contest. The tide is beautiful, but the tide is slow. The wire is already there, already live, already waiting for you to close the circuit with a handful of water. But here is where I have to be honest and careful with you, the way any decent investigator has to be honest, because it would be easy to oversell this and I do not want to. Slowing the heart is not the same thing as calming the mind, and if that were all the cold water did, I would not have kept you up this long telling you about it. A slow heart could just as easily belong to a person about to faint. What really matters, is not only that the heart slows, but what happens to the chemistry of stress while it slows. And that is where the numbers stop being merely interesting and start being, to my eye, genuinely astonishing. Because when the scientists went looking, expecting perhaps a small effect, what they found in the cold water group was not a small reduction in the stress hormone. It was very nearly no rise at all, while the people who faced the same stress without the cold water saw their stress hormone climb and climb. And that gap, that yawning gap between almost nothing and a great deal, is the piece that dismantles the whole comfortable story we started with tonight. So let me take you carefully into those numbers slowly, in the dark, the way you take apart anything you truly want to understand. So take the picture in your mind. You have a room full of volunteers, and you are going to do something a little unkind to them, but for a good reason. You are going to give them arithmetic to do under pressure, quickly, while someone watches and tells them, in effect, that they are not doing well enough. This is a laboratory way of squeezing a human being. It is not a real emergency, there is no lion in the room, but the body does not know that. The body plays it straight. The heart begins to hurry. The palms grow damp, and in the blood, quietly, the stress hormone begins to gather, the one called cortisol, which is the body's own way of shouting, "Get ready, something is demanding a great deal of you." Now they split these people into two groups. Both groups get the same nasty arithmetic, the same watcher, the same pressure. That is the whole point of a good experiment. You keep everything the same except for one thing, and then you change that one thing and see what happens. And the one thing they changed was almost laughably simple. To one group, while the pressure was on, they applied a cold stimulus to the face right around the freezing point of water, just about 0 degrees, a whisker below it. That is all. Cold on the face while the mind was being squeezed. And here is what came out of it. In the group with no cold, the ones simply left to sweat through the arithmetic, the heart did exactly what you would expect a frightened heart to do. It climbed. Depending on which part of the ordeal you measured, it went up by something like 1/4 to 2/5 above where it had started, 26 to 39 out of 100, a heart getting louder and faster as the pressure held. And meanwhile the cold-face group, facing the identical arithmetic, the identical watcher, showed their hearts going the other direction, down by roughly 1/5 to 1/4, 20 to 27 out of 100, slowing while under fire. Same fire. Opposite response. One body galloping, the other body settling, and the only difference between them was a patch of cold skin on the face. That alone would be a fine curiosity. But the heart rate, remember, is only the drumbeat you can hear from outside. What I really wanted to know, what the scientists really wanted to know, was the chemistry underneath. What did the cortisol do? Because the heart can be nudged by 100 little things, but the stress hormone, that is the deep signal. That is the body committing itself to a state of alarm that can last for hours after the arithmetic is over and forgotten. So they measured the peak rise in cortisol in each group. And I want you to hold your two hands out in the dark, because I am going to give you two numbers, and the distance between your hands is the whole argument of tonight. In the group with no cold water, the ordinary frightened group, the peak rise in the stress hormone was about 71.5 out of 100 above where it began. Now the spread on that number is enormous, give or take nearly 100, because people differ wildly in how hard they take a squeeze. Some barely rose, some shot up like a rocket. But the center of it, the typical response, was a great climb, the hormone very nearly doubling in the most reactive people. That is a body that has been genuinely alarmed and is paying the price in its blood. And the cold-face group facing the same squeeze. Their peak rise in the stress hormone was under 1 out of 100. Not 1. Under 1. 0.92 with a spread of about 32 either way, which means plenty of them showed no rise at all, and a fair few actually dipped below where they began. Read that number again slowly in your mind. Nearly no rise in the stress hormone, in people who were being pressured exactly as hard as the group whose hormone climbed toward doubling. and the statisticians ran their careful test on whether this gap could be an accident of small numbers, and they found the odds of it being mere chance were about 1 in 25. Small enough to sit up and take seriously. Now I have to be honest with you, because honesty is the only thing that makes any of this worth listening to. That spread of nearly 100 on the frightened group tells you these are not enormous crowds of people, and one study is one study, never the last word. A careful person holds it lightly, but hold it lightly and it still says something remarkable, something that fits with everything else we have been building all night. The cold on the face did not merely slow the heart. It reached down into the machinery that decides whether to flood the blood with alarm, and it turned that machinery down, almost off. While the mind above was still wrestling with the arithmetic, the brainstem below had quietly filed the emergency as handled. Sit with how strange that is. The thinking part of you, the worried part, is still convinced there is a problem. It is still doing the sums, still feeling watched, but underneath, on a channel the worried part cannot even hear, a decision has been made to stand down the stress chemistry. The face got cold, the ancient reflex fired, the vagus spoke to the heart, and somewhere in that same brainstem conversation, the order to pour out cortisol simply did not get sent. The body overruled the mind gently from below, using a door the mind did not know was there. And now put that beside what we learned about the coffee. Hours ago it feels like now at the very start. Because the coffee, the honest, elegant, well-understood coffee, does the opposite thing to this very same hormone. A moderate dose, a few milligrams for every kilogram you weigh, and the stress hormone climbs by about 30 out of 100 above a dummy pill, in the same direction roughly as the fright. Not as steep as being shouted at over arithmetic, but the same sign, the same upward push. Coffee, whatever else it does for you, nudges the stress chemistry up. Cold water on the face pulls it down towards zero. They are not two roads to the same town. They point in opposite directions on the one measurement that matters most for whether you feel besieged or whether you feel settled. I find that almost too neat, and when something seems too neat I get suspicious of myself, so let me be careful. Coffee is not poison. The upward nudge in the stress hormone is modest, and for most people on most mornings it is nothing to fear. And there is even a wrinkle here that surprised the people who measured it, which we will come back to, because coffee turns out to be stranger and gentler in one respect than its reputation suggests. But on this single axis, on the question of what happens to the alarm chemistry in the minutes after you use the thing, the two could not be more opposed. One raises the alarm a little, the other very nearly silences it. And here is the part that I think should keep you turning it over as you drift off. Why should cold on the face have any business touching the stress hormone at all? The heart, all right, I can almost see it. There is a nerve running from the face down into the brainstem, and another nerve running from the brainstem to the heart, and you can imagine the cold pulling on one end and the heart slowing on the other. But the stress hormone comes from a gland sitting way down atop the kidneys, a long way from your cheekbones, spoken to by a completely different chain of command that starts up in the deep old center of the brain. Why should a cold cheek reach all the way down that other chain and tell it, quietly, never mind? The answer, as best we understand it, is that these systems were never really separate. We draw them separately in the textbooks because it helps the student, one page for the heart nerves, another page for the stress glands. But the body did not read the textbook. Down in the brainstem, in that little relay station where the face nerve first delivers its cold news, the wiring spills over. The same incoming signal that says slow the heart also brushes against the circuits that would otherwise call for alarm, and it leans on them, and they quiet. Nature is economical. Having built one reflex to protect a diving animal, it let that reflex tug on everything nearby that might waste the animal's oxygen or its composure. A calm heart and a calm chemistry travel together, because for the creature holding its breath in cold, dark water, they always did. So the comfortable story we began with tonight, the one the whole waking world takes for settled, that the way to reset a tired nervous system is to reach for the warm cup, is not wrong exactly. It is just small. It is one narrow tool, slow to arrive, that pushes the alarm chemistry gently upward while it works and then hands you a bill hours later. And sitting quietly beside it, unglamorous, free, older than the human species, is a reflex that moves in seconds and pulls the alarm chemistry down toward nothing. We spent all this time praising the counterfeit key, and the real key was in the cold tap the whole time. Let me show you next just how deep in the animal kingdom this key has been cut. Because we are not the ones who invented it, and we are frankly rather clumsy at using it compared to the creatures who live by it. Consider the elephant seal, that great slumbering barrel of a creature hauled out on the ice of the Weddell Sea, looking for all the world like something that could not possibly be athletic at anything. And yet, this animal is one of the finest divers the ocean has ever produced. When it slides off the ice and drops into the black cold water, its heart does not race the way yours would if someone threw you into the sea. It does the opposite. Its heart, beating along at something like 125 beats a minute up on the surface, begins to slow and slow and slow until on a long dive it can fall as low as 10 beats a minute. 10. Sit with that number for a moment in the dark. A heart the size of a large melon, beating once every 6 seconds, and the animal perfectly calm, perfectly conscious, gliding down into a pressure that would crush the breath out of you or me, hunting in the cold with a heart barely ticking over. Now, how does it get away with this? If your heart slowed to 10 beats a minute, you would faint and then you would die, because your tissues would starve for oxygen. But the seal has stacked the deck long before it ever touches the water. It carries roughly 3 times as much blood, pound for pound, as you do, and that blood is thick with the oxygen-carrying stuff, far richer in hemoglobin than yours, the molecule in the red cells that grabs oxygen and ferries it. And its muscles are loaded with a cousin of that molecule, myoglobin, which is why seal meat is so dark, almost black. Myoglobin is a little oxygen warehouse built right into the muscle tissue itself. So the seal dives with a body that is, in a real sense, a charged battery of oxygen. It does not need to breathe for a long, long time because it packed a lunch. And the slow heart is not a malfunction. It is the strategy. A slow heart spends the oxygen slowly. It is the difference between a spendthrift who burns through his wages by Tuesday and a careful man who makes the same wages last the month. The seal is being frugal with the one currency that matters down there, and the reflex we have been talking about all night. That same trigeminal signal, that same vagus command, is what turns the dial down and makes the frugality possible. And here is the thing that ought to make the hair stand up a little on your arm. It is the same reflex, not a similar one, not a distant relative. The very same wiring, the cold on the face, the nerve to the brainstem, the vagus back to the heart that you carry behind your own cheeks right now. The seal has simply tuned it to a degree we can only admire. Evolution took the identical instrument and, in the seal, cranked every knob to its extreme. Bigger blood volume, richer blood, a heart willing to crawl down to 10. We have the same instrument, we just play it softly and mostly by accident, and mostly we never play it at all. But do not go thinking the seals kept this gift for themselves. Look at our own kind, and you will find people who have bent their own bodies toward the water within the span of human history. Off the coasts and among the scattered islands of Southeast Asia there live a seafaring people, the Samabajo, who have spent uncounted generations diving for their food and their living, holding their breath and going down with a spear to the reefs and the sea floor. And a curious thing has happened to them. The slow and patient thing that happens whenever a people lean their whole way of life against a single hard demand for long enough. They have been shaped by it. Natural selection, the plain old sculptor that shaped the seal, has been quietly at work on these divers too. They have larger spleens than their neighbors who do not dive, measurably, reliably larger. Now, why on earth would the spleen matter to a diver? The spleen is not an organ most of us ever think about. It sits up under the ribs on the left, a soft dark thing, and one of its quiet jobs is to hold a reserve of red blood cells in storage, like a cellar stocked with bottles against a hard winter. And when the body is starved of oxygen, when you are deep and holding your breath and the oxygen is running thin, the spleen does something rather wonderful. It squeezes, it contracts, and it wrings that stored blood out into your circulation. A fresh transfusion of oxygen-carrying red cells delivered from your own internal cellar, exactly when you need it most. It is a self-administered blood transfusion, no needle, no donor, just an organ you forgot you had, doing you a favor in the deep. The bigger the cellar, the bigger the favor. And the Samabajau, generation upon generation, have grown bigger cellars. They also constrict the vessels in their limbs harder than most, shunting the blood inward more fiercely toward the brain and the heart. The same clever rerouting the whole reflex performs, only turned up. And here is a detail I find quietly astonishing. This spleen business, this contraction that releases the stored red cells, it can begin before the heart even starts to slow. Think about the choreography of that. The reflex does not simply fire one command, it orchestrates. The spleen may already be squeezing its reserves into your blood while the bradycardia, the slowing of the heart, is still gathering itself. It is as if the body, on receiving the news that cold water has arrived, does not react with a single reflex, but with a whole coordinated campaign, each part timed, each part doing its share. A little brainstem symphony you never asked for and never notice. So we humans have been quietly evolving toward the seal, in at least one corner of the world, over a stretch of time short enough that it happened while people were already people, already telling stories and building boats. That is how useful this reflex is. Useful enough to reshape a spleen. And yet, and here is a fact to turn over slowly as you drift, we adults are, on the whole, rather bad at this. Clumsy, half deaf to our own equipment. Because there is one group of humans who use the reflex with a purity the rest of us have lost, and they are the smallest and newest among us. The babies. A human infant under a year old has the reflex running clean and complete and effortless. You do not have to teach the baby to hold its breath. You do not have to coach it or ask it to concentrate or explain the physiology. You simply bring cold water to the little face and the whole apparatus fires, the full reflex, the breath suspended, the heart slowed, all of it, with no deliberate breath holding required at all. The face gets wet and cold, and the ancient machinery does the rest, top to bottom, without a single conscious instruction from that tiny mind. Now for you and me it is not quite so automatic. In the grown adult, the strongest slowing of the heart wants two ingredients together. The cold wetness on the face and the held breath, the two of them combined, each amplifying the other. Hold your breath in dry air and you get only a modest, polite little dip in heart rate. Wet the face without holding the breath and you get something, but not the full measure. Put the two together, the cold water and the suspended breath, and the reflex swings open to its fullest. But the infant needs no such trick. For the infant, the cold face alone is the whole key, turned all the way. Somewhere between that helpless competence of the cradle and our fumbling adulthood, we mislaid part of the instinct. We did not lose the wiring. The wiring is all still there, every nerve, every relay, sitting behind your face at this very moment, fully installed, fully functional. We just lost the easy, unthinking access to it. The baby is born knowing how to dive. We have to be reminded, and I think there is something almost tender in that, if you let yourself feel it. The oldest reflex, the one we share with the seal and the diving bird and every air-breathing animal that has ever slipped beneath cold water, is at its cleanest and truest in the newborn, and it fades toward a mumble as we grow up and grow clever and start reaching for cups of hot, bitter water to fix a feeling this reflex could fix in seconds. The knowledge was never lost. It was only overgrown, the way a garden path goes under the weeds when nobody walks it. And all of this, the seal at 10 beats a minute, the diver with his generous spleen, the baby who dives without being asked, all of it points back at the same modest little arc of nerve, and it raises a question we have circled all night and are now close enough to answer properly. What exactly is happening in those first few seconds? Not the story of it, the machinery of it, the actual step-by-step of how a splash of cold tap water becomes, in less time than it takes to say so, a direct order sent down to the beating of your heart. Let me walk you through that chain now, one link at a time, slowly, because it is a beautiful little piece of engineering and it deserves an unhurried look. Picture the water leaving the tap. It is not remarkable water. It is perhaps 10 degrees Celsius, maybe a little colder, the ordinary chill of a pipe that has been sitting in a cool wall all night. You cup it in your hands and you bring it up and you press it against your forehead, your cheeks, the bridge of your nose, the skin around your eyes. Nothing has happened yet that any philosopher would call thinking. And yet a decision is already being made, down in a place you have no conscious access to, and it is being made faster than you can form the word cold. The first thing that happens is molecular, and it is small, and it is exquisite. Buried in the endings of the nerves that serve your face, there are tiny gates. We call one of them TRPM8. Do not let the name trouble you. It is just a label a chemist hung on a little protein that sits in the wall of a nerve cell folded up like a trapdoor. This trapdoor has one job. It watches the temperature. When the skin around it is warm, the door stays shut and the nerve stays quiet and you feel nothing worth mentioning. But when the temperature falls below roughly 25 degrees Celsius, which is to say below the temperature of a mildly cool room, the little door changes its shape. It opens, and when it opens, charged particles rush through it, and that rush is the beginning of an electrical signal. Cold water is well past that threshold. 10 degrees is deep into the range where these doors are flung wide, and if the water is colder still, below about 17 degrees Celsius, a second kind of gate joins in, one we call TRPA1, the one that handles the sharper, more biting sort of cold, the kind that reads almost as pain. So the colder the splash, the more doors you throw open at once, and the louder the shout that travels inward. That is why the tap works and a warm cloth does not. It is not a matter of wetness or drama. It is a matter of crossing a temperature line drawn into the very shape of a protein. Now these little cold gates do not sit just anywhere. They ride on a particular family of nerve fibers, thin ones, the slow, unhurried kind we call C fibers, and these belong to a great cable of sensation called the trigeminal nerve. The trigeminal is the fifth of the cranial nerves, and it is the one that owns your face. Everything you feel across your forehead and cheeks and jaw reports home through it. So the moment those cold gates open, the trigeminal picks up the message and carries it inward, back through a little swelling of nerve bodies we call the trigeminal ganglion, which you can think of as a switchboard, a place where all these facial wires gather before diving deeper into the head. And where do they dive to? Not up, not to the great wrinkled cortex on top, the part of you that reasons and worries and rehearses tomorrow's arguments. That is the surprising thing, and I want you to sit with it for a moment as you lie there. This message does not go to the thinking part of you at all. It goes down to the oldest floor of the building, to the brainstem, that thick stalk where the brain becomes the spinal cord, the part we share with the fish and the lizard and every creature that ever had to keep a heart beating without being told. The signal arrives at a little station down there with another unlovely name, the nucleus tractus solitarius, which for our purposes tonight I will just call the listening post. It is the place in the medulla where the body's quiet reports come in, the ones about blood pressure and breath and the chemistry of the blood. The cold news lands there, and the listening post, having heard, does not deliberate. It does not weigh options. It reaches across to a neighbor, another cluster down in the same old floor, the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus, and it says, in effect, send the command. And out goes the vagus nerve. The vagus is the 10th cranial nerve, and it is a wanderer, that is what its name means, a nerve that leaves the skull and roams down through the neck and into the chest and belly, touching the heart and the lungs and the gut along the way. Of everything it touches, tonight we care about one destination. The vagus runs a fiber down to a little patch of specialized tissue in the upper wall of your heart, the sinoatrial node, the natural pacemaker, the metronome that decides how often the whole muscle squeezes. And when the vagus arrives there carrying this command, it releases a chemical whisper that tells the pacemaker to ease off. Slow down. Take your time. And the heart obeys. Count the stops with me, because the shortness of the list is the whole point. Cold gate opens. Trigeminal carries it in. Listening post hears it. Vagus command goes out. Pacemaker slows. That is the entire journey. 5 links, and not one of them runs through the part of you that has opinions. The cortex, the seat of your whole conscious life, is never consulted. It finds out later, the way you find out about whether you slept through. This is what we mean when we call it a reflex arc. It is a loop wired to close on its own, sealed off from debate, built for speed. And speed is exactly what it delivers. The heart rate begins to fall within seconds. The sharpest part of the slowing has been measured inside the first 30 seconds of the face meeting the water. There is no swallowing, no waiting for a stomach to absorb anything, no chemical drifting through the blood looking for a liver to change it. It is nerve talking directly to nerve, and nerve is the fastest messenger the body owns. Set that beside the other timeline for a moment, gently, the way you would lay two photographs side by side. The cup of hot bitter water has to be sipped. Then it sits in the stomach and moves into the gut, and the caffeine has to cross the wall of the gut into the blood, and even at its brisk best it takes 15 minutes to begin reaching its peak, and it may take as long as 2 full hours to get there. 15 minutes against 30 seconds. And the 15 minutes is the optimistic end. One of these is a letter posted and awaited. The other is a hand on your shoulder. They are not the same kind of thing at all, and once you have seen the wiring, you cannot unsee the difference. But I have only told you half of what the brainstem does in those seconds, and the other half is stranger, and it is the part that makes this reflex more than a simple slowing. Because at the very same instant that the vagus is telling the heart to relax its pace, a different set of orders is going out to the blood vessels of your arms and legs and skin. Those vessels are being told to tighten, to clamp down. And that order does not come from the calming vagus at all. It comes from the opposite branch of the nervous system, the sympathetic branch, the very branch we usually blame for panic and racing and fight and flight. So here is the paradox I promised you hours ago and have been carrying toward you ever since. In a single unified response, your body slows the heart with one hand and squeezes the vessels with the other. It runs the brake and a certain kind of throttle at the same moment, and somehow, instead of tearing itself in two, it accomplishes something very precise. Think about what that clamping is for. If the vessels in your cold limbs and your skin narrow down, the blood that would have wandered out to your fingers and your toes has nowhere to go but inward, toward the core, toward the two organs that cannot be allowed to starve, the brain and the heart itself. So the reflex is not simply calming you. It is quietly rationing. It is deciding, without asking, that in this moment the extremities can wait and the center must be fed. It is the behavior of a creature preparing to go without air, a creature about to dive, protecting the crown jewels of its oxygen supply. That is why we call the whole thing the diving reflex, even when there is no dive, even when you are only a tired person at a sink at 7 in the morning with no intention of going underwater. Your body does not know that. Your body reads the cold on the face, and the pattern is ancient, and it simply does what it has always done. And there is one more player that stirs in those early seconds, quieter than the rest, easy to overlook. Down on the left side of your belly sits the spleen, a soft reservoir, a storehouse. In the grip of this reflex, the spleen can begin to contract, and when it squeezes it, wrings out a store of red blood cells it has been keeping in reserve, pushing them into the circulation, thickening the blood just slightly with fresh carriers of oxygen. In some measurements, that squeeze begins even before the heart has finished its slowing, as though the body's first instinct is to call up its reinforcements before it steadies its pace. It is a small effect in you and me, but hold on to it, because in certain creatures, and even in certain people, that little squeeze of the spleen has been sharpened by long ages into something extraordinary, and we are going to follow it out to the edge of what a body can do. For now, only notice the shape of the whole thing. One splash. 5 nerve stops. 2 opposing branches pulling in perfect coordination. A reservoir emptying itself into the stream. All of it arranged, rehearsed, and fired before you have had a single conscious thought about any of it. Follow that little squeeze out to the cold gray water beneath the ice of the Weddell Sea, and you find a creature that has taken this same reflex, the very one folded inside you and me, and pushed it to a place that seems almost impossible. The elephant seal. A great heavy animal that lives half its life in the deep. When it dives, and I mean a long dive, one of the extended plunges that carries it far down into the dark, its heart does not merely slow the way yours does when you dip your face in a basin. Its heart falls from something like 125 beats every minute all the way down to 10. 10 beats a minute. Picture that. Picture a heart the size of your two fists together, beating once and then waiting, and beating again so slowly that between the beats you could draw a long breath and let it out. And the animal is not dying. The animal is perfectly calm, perfectly in command, gliding through the black water on almost nothing, spending its oxygen the way a careful traveler spends the last coins in a purse, one at a time, only when there is no other choice. How does it get away with this? Because it came prepared in ways we did not. Its blood is not like ours. For every pound of that seal there is roughly 3 times the volume of blood you would find carrying the same weight of person around. And that blood is richer, thick with hemoglobin, the little iron-bearing carriers that grab oxygen in the lungs and ferry it out to the tissues. And in the muscles themselves there is a cousin molecule, myoglobin, packed in at concentrations that would astonish you, a second pantry stocked full and waiting, so that the swimming muscles carry their own private supply of oxygen down into the deep and do not have to keep begging the blood for more. So the seal dives with a warehouse where you carry a lunchbox. And the reflex, the same trigeminal whisper to the vagus, the same slowing of the heart, the same closing down of the vessels in the skin and the flippers, simply manages that warehouse with a patience refined across more generations than we can easily count. It is the identical trick. Only the seal has been rehearsing it far, far longer and with far better equipment. Now you might think, well, that is a seal, a specialist, an animal built by the sea for the sea. What has that to do with a person standing at a bathroom sink? And here is where the story bends back toward us in a way I find genuinely moving. Because there are people, living people, who have been shaped by the same slow pressure, not over the ages of a whole species built for water, but within the span of human history, on human faces, in human blood. Along the coasts and scattered islands of Southeast Asia there live a people sometimes called the sea nomads, the Samabahao, who for uncounted generations have made their living by diving. Not with tanks, not with any apparatus, just a breath and a plunge and long minutes on the bottom gathering what the sea will give. Generation after generation, the ones who could stay down longest, who could work the coldest and the deepest, were the ones who fed their families best. And nature, quietly without any plan, kept a tally. What the tally produced is remarkable. These divers, on average, carry spleens noticeably larger than most other people's. Remember the spleen, that soft storehouse of red blood cells we followed a moment ago, the reservoir that wrings itself out when the reflex takes hold? Make that reservoir bigger, and every dive begins with a larger reinforcement waiting in the wings. When the reflex fires and the low oxygen begins to bite, the enlarged spleen contracts and floods the blood with a heavier dose of fresh oxygen carriers than yours or mine ever could. And alongside that, their bodies clamp down harder on the vessels of the skin and the limbs, a fiercer version of the same peripheral squeeze we have been describing, hoarding the oxygen for the brain and the heart with a discipline bred into them. This is not training. A person can train, and training helps. But this is deeper than training. This is written into them, passed from parent to child, the same way the shape of a face or the color of the eyes is passed along. Natural selection, working on the machinery of a reflex, on a human population within reach of our own history. The same splash, the same nerve, only tuned by long necessity to a sharper edge. So we have the ordinary version, sitting quietly inside you, ready at any sink. We have the seal, with its warehouse of blood and its heart ticking down to 10. And we have these divers, our own kind, carrying an enlarged reservoir and a fiercer clamp. 3 settings of one instrument, and every one of them begins in exactly the same place. Cold on the face, a signal on the 5th cranial nerve, a word passed to the vagus. It is one of those moments in the study of living things where you see a single simple idea wearing 3 different costumes and you realize that underneath it was the same idea all along. Let me bring it back from the ocean now, back to dry land, back indoors into a room with white walls and bright lights and a small patient in serious trouble. Because this reflex is not only a curiosity of biology, it is a tool. It is a thing that people in white coats reach for when a heart has lost its way. There is a condition where the heart, without warning, begins to race. Not the ordinary quickening of a startled child, but a runaway rhythm. A frantic gallop where the upper chambers fire far too fast and the whole pump goes into a kind of panic, beating so quickly it can barely fill before it squeezes again. In the old naming, it is a fast rhythm born above the ventricles, and when it seizes a small child, it is a frightening thing to watch, the little chest heaving, the pulse a blur too quick to count. Now there are drugs for this. There are, in the worst cases, jolts of electricity. But before any of that, there is a bucket. There is cold water. There is the oldest trick the body owns, the one Goodwin stumbled onto with his cold immersions 2 centuries before anyone thought to bring it into a hospital. You take cold water, ice water, and you apply it to the child's face, across the forehead and the bridge of the nose and the cheeks for just a few seconds. 5 seconds. And you wait, because you are not treating the heart directly at all. You are speaking to the brainstem in the only language it cannot ignore. You are telling it, in the language of cold on the face, that the body is diving. And the brainstem answers the way it always answers, with a great calming surge down the vagus nerve, a flood of the slowing signal straight to the pacemaker of the heart. And very often that surge is exactly strong enough to interrupt the runaway rhythm, to break the frantic loop, to let the heart stumble, catch itself, and fall back into its proper steady beat. How well does it work? There was a careful look at this in a group of young patients, some of them only days old, some as old as 15 years, brought in with these racing episodes. And they tried the cold water on the face, those few seconds of ice, over and over across many separate episodes of the runaway rhythm. 28 episodes in all. And the cold water on the face restored the normal rhythm in 27 of them. 27 out of 28. That is a success rate you would be glad to have from any medicine in any bottle on any shelf, and here it comes from a bowl of ice water and a knowledge of one nerve. The heart thrown into chaos, quieted by the memory of a dive the child never took. Sit with that for a moment before we go on, because it tells you something about how deep this reflex runs. It is not a preference. It is not a suggestion the body can take or leave. It is a command line wired straight past all the thinking parts of the brain, so reliable that a physician can pick it up and use it like a switch on the wall. You cannot talk your heart out of a panic, but you can dunk your face in the cold, and the ancient machinery does what no amount of reasoning could. The pathway does not care whether you understand it. It does not wait for your permission. It was laid down long before there was anything in you capable of asking why. And this, you see, is precisely the thing the cup of coffee can never do. We spent our first long stretch admiring coffee, giving it every fair hearing, following its clever counterfeit key into the locks of the brain, watching it borrow against a debt it could not pay. Coffee is subtle. Coffee is chemistry. A molecule drifting through the blood, finding receptors, occupying them, a slow tide that has to rise for a quarter hour at the very least before you feel the faintest lift. But coffee cannot reach down and seize the wheel of the heart in 5 seconds. Coffee has no line to the brainstem. It has no nerve to ride. It can only wait in the bloodstream and hope enough of its little imitations find their locks in time. The cold on the face needs no such waiting. It is not a chemical creeping through you. It is a signal, an electrical word running up a wire at the speed nerves run, arriving before the coffee has even left the cup. So keep that contrast burning as we turn now to look, more slowly and more carefully than we yet have, at the exact quality of the calm these two things produce. Because it is not enough to say one is faster. We must ask what kind of quiet each one leaves behind, and whether the quiet of the cold water is the same creature as the jangled, borrowed brightness of the cup. And there, in that difference, is where the real surprise has been waiting for us all along. Let me tell you what I mean by the quality of a quiet, because it is not a small thing, and most people never stop to notice that quiets come in different flavors. Imagine you have had a hard day, and you sit down in a chair, and someone hands you a warm drink, and the room goes still. That is one kind of quiet. Now imagine a different thing. Imagine you are underwater, holding your breath, and everything above the surface, all the noise of the world is simply gone, muffled, far away, and your own heartbeat has slowed to a long, slow drum. That is a different kind of quiet altogether. And the strange and lovely fact we are circling toward is that the cold water on your face gives you the second kind, the deep kind, while the cup of coffee, for all its charm, can only ever imitate the first, and imitate it badly, because underneath its calm there is a small engine running that never quite turns off. So let us look at what the coffee actually leaves behind, honestly, without any grudge against it. When the caffeine is riding high in your blood, it has blocked the tiredness signal, yes, but remember what it has also done. It has nudged your stress machinery. At a dose of about 3.3 milligrams for every kilogram of your body, it lifts the hormone that tells your adrenal glands to work, and it lifts cortisol itself by roughly 30% above what a sugar pill would do. 30%. That is not nothing. Cortisol is the hormone your body pours out when it wants you ready for trouble. So the brightness of coffee is a brightness with a thin thread of alarm woven through it. You feel awake, but part of that awakeness is your body being told very gently that something might be about to go wrong. It is a wakefulness with its shoulders slightly raised. Now hold that beside the cold water and watch what happens, because this is the moment the whole argument turns over in your hands. When they took people and put a cold stimulus on the face, just about 1 degree below the freezing point of water, right in the middle of a task designed to stress them, designed to make cortisol climb, the people without the cold saw their cortisol leap by something enormous, 70% and more above where it started. Their bodies did exactly what bodies do under pressure. They poured out the alarm hormone. But the people who got the cold on the face, their cortisol barely moved. Under 1%. Essentially flat. The stress was happening to them, the same hard task, the same pressure, and yet the cold water had reached in and held the alarm bell still so it could not ring. One thing lifts the alarm hormone by 30%. The other thing pins it to the floor while the world tries to make it climb. These are not two shades of the same calm. They are opposites. They are moving in opposite directions, and I want you to sit with how odd that is, because it is genuinely odd. The cold water is unpleasant. Nobody enjoys the first shock of it. Your skin does not like it, and yet the thing your skin does not like is the very thing that switches off the body's panic chemistry, while the warm and pleasant cup, the thing you look forward to, quietly turns the panic chemistry up a notch. The pleasant thing agitates. The unpleasant thing settles. Nature is under no obligation to make the good medicine taste good, and here she has arranged things almost as a joke, so that the comfort nudges you towards stress and the discomfort delivers you into peace. Why should that be? Why does the cold quiet go so much deeper? I think it is because of the double thing we spoke about before, the two branches pulling at once, and it is worth turning that idea over one more time now that we can see what it buys you. When the cold hits the face, the slowing branch, the vagus, reaches down and eases the heart, takes it by the reins and asks it to walk instead of run. And at the very same instant, the other branch, the one that usually means excitement, tightens the small vessels out at the edges of you, in the fingers, in the skin, and draws the blood inward, toward the brain, toward the heart, toward the core. So you have one hand on the brake and one hand doing something that looks like the opposite. And yet they are not fighting. They are cooperating. They have agreed on a single purpose, which is to protect the most important rooms of the house and let the outer rooms go cold for a while. That is a state you almost never enter in ordinary life. Usually your body runs on one dial. When you are frightened, everything speeds. When you are drowsy, everything slows. The dial goes up or the dial goes down. But the diving reflex is not the dial going up or down. It is something stranger. It is the heart slowing while the vessels tighten, calm underneath and readiness on the surface, all at once, held together in a single command that came not from your thinking mind, but from the ancient machinery in the stem of your brain. The cortex, the great gray thinking cap you are so proud of, was never even asked. The order went out below it, in the older country where the reflexes live. And here is a detail that ought to give you a small shiver of wonder before you drift off. Part of this response may begin even before the heart slows. Down in the left side of your belly sits the spleen, a soft little reservoir most people forget they own, and in a good dive it squeezes. It contracts, and it pushes stored red blood cells out into the circulation, extra carriers for oxygen sent into the stream just when the body suspects oxygen might get scarce. Your body, in other words, does not merely slow down and hunker. It resupplies. It opens a hidden storehouse and hands out rations. And in some people, the sea peoples of Southeast Asia, generations of diving have made that storehouse larger, an inherited gift written into the body itself, so that they carry a bigger reserve and can stay under longer than you or I ever could. Think of it, a whole people shaped in their very organs by the act of putting the face in cold water and going down. That is how deep this reflex runs in what we are. It is not a trick, it is a birthright. Now, the coffee has nothing like this. I do not say it to be unkind to the cup. I say it because it is simply true, and the truth here is the whole point. Coffee has no spleen to squeeze. Coffee has no nerve to ride down into the heart. Coffee cannot draw your blood inward to guard your core. All coffee can do is float in the blood and occupy the tiredness receptors. Occupy them like a man sitting in a chair that is not his, so the rightful owner cannot sit down. And while it sits there, doing its one clever imitation, the tiredness it is hiding does not go away. The adenosine keeps piling up behind the blocked doors, patient, accumulating, waiting for the imitation to wear thin. 5 hours, give or take, for half of the caffeine to be cleared, and in some people much longer, and all through those hours the true tiredness is gathering in the hall, and when at last the doors swing open, the whole crowd of it rushes in at once. That is the crash. That is the debt being called in. The cold water borrows from no one. It asks nothing back. It does not hide your tiredness behind a blocked door. It reaches past the whole question of tiredness entirely and speaks directly to the machinery of calm. So when you splash the cold water and feel that odd, clean stillness spread through you, understand that you are not feeling a chemical settle over your mind like a fog. You are feeling a switch throw. You are feeling the oldest circuit in your nervous system fire. The one that kept your distant swimming ancestors alive. The one a human infant is born already knowing how to use before it can even hold up its own head. And the quiet it leaves behind is not borrowed, and it is not owed. It is paid for in full, in the only currency that matters, which is a signal sent and received along a living wire, and then, its work done, gone, leaving no debt collector waiting at the door for the afternoon. Keep that picture close as we go on, because there is one more place we have to visit before we can rest. One more piece of evidence that turns this from a curiosity into something the people who guard human hearts already rely on. For if the cold water on the face can do all this in a calm and healthy body, then somewhere in the rooms where hearts go wrong, someone must have thought to reach for a bucket of ice when a heart was racing out of control. And someone did. And what they found there, in a ward full of frightened children with hearts beating far too fast, is the plainest proof of all that this reflex is no fork remedy, but a lever built into your body, waiting all your life for a hand cold enough to pull it. So let me take you into that ward quietly, the way you would walk into any room where sick children are sleeping. It is a pediatric ward, and the trouble here is not a fever or a broken bone. It is a heart that has forgotten how to keep its own time. There is a rhythm problem doctors call paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia, which is a long and frightening name for a simple and frightening thing. The upper chambers of the heart begin to fire far too fast, over and over, in a loop that feeds on itself, and the heart races along at a speed no resting body was ever meant to hold. In a small child, this can climb to 200 beats a minute, or beyond. The heart is beating so quickly that it barely has time to fill with blood between beats, so it moves less blood, not more, for all its frantic effort. The child goes pale. The child is afraid. And the doctors need to stop that runaway loop and let the heart settle back into its own steady sinus rhythm, the ordinary honest beat it is supposed to keep. Now there are drugs for this. There are shocks for this. But before any of that, in a great many cases, there is something so plain that when you first hear it, you think someone is telling you a joke. They reach for cold water or a bag of crushed ice, and they press it gently to the child's face. There was a study published back in 1995 in the Turkish Journal of Pediatrics, and it looked at 10 young patients. The youngest was only 7 days old, a newborn just a week into the world. The oldest was 15 years. Between them, these children suffered many separate episodes of this racing heart, 28 episodes in all. And the treatment, the very first thing tried, was ice water applied to the face for about 5 seconds. 5 seconds. Count it out slowly to yourself in the dark, and you will see how short a time that is. Out of those 28 racing, runaway episodes, the cold water on the face brought the heart back to its proper rhythm in 27 of them. 27 out of 28. That is a success rate of 96%. For a treatment that costs nothing, that carries no needle, that asks only for water and cold and 5 seconds of a doctor's steady hand. Think about what you have just heard. The most reliable first move against one of the more alarming rhythm problems a child's heart can fall into is the very same reflex we have been tracing this whole time. The same trigeminal nerve carrying the same message of cold to the same quiet stations of the brainstem. The same vagus nerve reaching down to lay its calming hand on the heart. Only here it is not being used to reset a tired office worker. It is being used to catch a heart in mid-fall and set it back on its feet. And you must understand why it works, because it is the whole argument of this lecture standing there in a hospital gown. That runaway loop in the heart depends on the electrical signal racing around a little circuit faster than the tissue can recover. The vagus nerve, when it fires, slows the passage of that signal through a crucial junction in the heart, the gate between the upper chambers and the lower ones. It puts a drag on the traffic. And sometimes that drag, that little pause the vagus introduces, is just enough to break the loop, the way you might snap a spinning jump rope by simply stepping on it once. The circle is broken. The frenzy has nowhere to run, and the heart, released, falls gratefully back into its ordinary rhythm. The cold water did not shock the heart. It did not poison the bad rhythm. It simply asked the vagus nerve to do the one thing the vagus nerve has always known how to do, and the vagus nerve obliged in seconds. Now I want you to hold that hospital scene beside the picture of the coffee cup we started with, and feel how far apart they truly are. Nobody, in the whole history of medicine, ever ran into an emergency room, pressed a warm mug of coffee to a child's face, and watched a racing heart go quiet. It would be absurd. Not because caffeine does nothing, we have spent long stretches of this night giving caffeine its full and honest due, but because caffeine is slow, and caffeine pushes in the wrong direction for this particular trouble. Caffeine takes 15 minutes at the very least to begin, and the better part of an hour or two to reach its peak, and even then it raises the tone of things, it nudges the stress chemistry upward, it borrows against a debt it cannot pay. When a heart is racing out of control, you do not have an hour, and you do not want anything that pushes the system further toward alarm. You want the opposite. You want the break. And the break is cold water on the face, arriving in seconds, needing no permission from the thinking part of the brain, older than language, older than our species, sitting in the wiring of every air-breathing animal that has ever had to hold its breath. There is something almost humbling in that when you sit with it. We build enormous machinery to help sick hearts. We have chemistry of great sophistication, and it has saved a great many lives, and I would never wave it away. But underneath all of it, waiting the whole time, is a reflex you were born already owning. That costs nothing. That a doctor can trigger with a paper cup of ice water when the fancier tools are still being fetched. The body brought its own emergency lever. We only had to notice it was there. And here is a detail I find quietly wonderful, and I want to give it to you before we move on. Remember I told you that in the very youngest, in infants under a year old, the reflex is even more complete than in you and me. A grown person usually needs the whole recipe to get the deepest slowing, the cold and the wetness and the hell breath all together. But a baby only has to have its face touched by cold water, and the reflex fires in full, no hell breath required, no cooperation asked. The wiring is fresh from the factory, and it responds to the plain signal without any fuss. That is why the newborn in that study, 7 days old, could be helped by the same 5 seconds of cold as the 15-year-old. The lever is installed before we can walk, before we can speak, before we know our own names. It was one of the first working systems we ever had. Long before a child can be taught anything, the child's own brainstem already knows this ancient answer to cold on the face, and it will give that answer whether the child understands it or not. So where does that leave the argument we began with, hours ago now, when I stood here and repeated the whole world's quiet faith in the morning cup? We have watched that faith hold up under gentle questioning, and then, piece by piece, we have watched it come apart. Not because coffee is a fraud, but because coffee was never doing the thing we imagined it was doing. It does not clear away your tiredness. It hides the tiredness behind a counterfeit key jammed in a lock, while the real weight of the day keeps piling up in the dark behind the door, waiting for the crash. It does not soothe the stress chemistry, it raises it, stacking its own push right on top of the surge your body already delivers in the first hour after waking. It is slow to arrive and slow to leave, a guest that lingers in the blood for hours after you wanted it gone. And for all of that, it never once touches the great calming nerve, the vagus, the one cable that can actually reach down and change how fast your heart is beating right now, in this breath, in this second. The cold water does. That is the plain and startling heart of it. A double handful of water from the tap, colder than the room, splashed across the face, and a signal leaves your skin and travels a road older than the coffee plant, older than agriculture, older than fire, and it arrives at the oldest part of your brain and pulls a lever that has been sitting there, oiled and ready, since before you were born. Your heart slows. Your vessels tighten to guard the blood your brain and heart most need. Your stress chemistry, instead of climbing, holds still or even eases. And all of this happens in the time it would take you to reach across the counter for the mug you have not yet had a chance to pour. But I do not want you to leave tonight thinking this is only a race, coffee against water, one clock against another, as if the whole point were merely which is faster. Because the deeper marvel, the thing I want to lower you gently toward as this long night goes on, is not the speed at all. It is what the speed reveals about the kind of creature you are. It tells you that the calm you have been chasing in a cup was never a substance you had to swallow. It was a switch. And you have had your hand on it your whole life without knowing. So let us go now a little further into that idea and ask what it means that a nervous system as complicated as yours can be steadied not by adding something clever to it, but by touching it in exactly the right ancient place with nothing more elaborate than cold. Think for a moment about how strange it is that the touch has to be cold. Not just wet. Cold. Warm water on the face does very little. You can splash your cheeks with water at body temperature all afternoon, and your heart will go on beating exactly as it pleased. The secret is in the temperature, and the secret of the temperature is a tiny molecular door I told you about earlier, sitting in the endings of the nerve that reads your face. That door only swings open when the world outside cools below about 25 degrees Celsius. Dip a little lower, toward the temperature of water from a cold tap, and it opens wider still. Go colder yet, down below 17 degrees, and a second kind of door, a rougher one that reports genuinely painful cold, joins in. So when you cup cold water against your face, you are not sending a vague message that says something is happening. You are sending a very specific message, in a very specific language, that says, precisely, the temperature here has dropped, and it has dropped by this much. The nervous system has a thermometer built into your skin, and it reports in a dialect the brainstem has understood since long before there were people to speak it. And here is a lovely little wrinkle that most folks never hear. The reflex is strongest when the cold arrives against skin that was warm a moment before. If you have been sitting in a heated room, cozy, a bit drowsy, and then you press the cold water on, the plunge in temperature across that boundary is steep, and the steepness is part of the signal. The nerve is not only asking how cold, it is asking how suddenly. A slow drift down in temperature the body can shrug off. A cliff, a sharp edge between warm and cold that it cannot ignore. So the tired morning, the warm bed you crawled out of, the flush of a heated kitchen, all of that is not working against you. It is loading the spring. It is what makes the cold land harder. Now I want to take you somewhere cold and enormous, because nature has been running this experiment far longer and far more seriously than any of us with our little bowls of tap water. Go south, all the way south to the seas that ring the bottom of the world, where the water is black and freezing, and a mammal far larger than a man slips beneath the ice and simply disappears for the better part of an hour. The elephant seal. On the surface, its heart trots along at something like 125 beats a minute, brisk, ordinary, the pace of any warm-blooded animal going about its business. Then it dives. And that heart, that great muscular pump, slows and slows and slows until it is beating as few as 10 times a minute. 10. One beat, and then a long patient wait, and then another. It has taken the very same reflex that lives in you, the very same wiring, and turned the dial all the way to a setting you and I will never reach. How does it get away with it? Because it came prepared in ways we did not. It carries roughly 3 times as much blood, pound for pound, as you do, and that blood is thick with the molecules that hold oxygen, both the kind that rides in the red cells of the bloodstream and the kind that waits, hoarded inside the muscle itself. The seal is not merely holding its breath. It is carrying a private supply of oxygen packed into its tissues like provisions for a long voyage, and it doles that supply out slowly by slowing everything down. The bradycardia, that dramatic hush of the heartbeat, is how it stretches one lungful into a journey. What you feel as a gentle steadying when you splash your face is, in the seal, a fully developed survival engine, the same reflex bred to its magnificent extreme. And you do not have to travel to the poles to find it perfected. There are people, the Sama Bajau, who have lived for uncounted generations on and under the warm seas of Southeast Asia, diving deep on a single breath to gather what the sea offers, spending so much of their lives below the surface that the sea has, in a real and measurable way, reshaped them. Natural selection has given them larger spleens. Now the spleen is an odd little organ, and most people never give it a thought, but it turns out to be a kind of reservoir, a cellar where the body stores extra red blood cells against a hard day. When a dive drives the oxygen low, the spleen contracts and squeezes that reserve out into the circulation, and suddenly the blood is richer, carrying more oxygen than it did a moment before. A blood transfusion delivered by your own body, on demand without a needle. And the Bajau, through the slow patient sculpting of generations, have larger cellars and a fiercer squeeze. The same reflex again, only tuned by the pressures of a life spent between two worlds. I find something deeply moving in that, and I want you to sit with it as you drift. This single ancient arc of nerve, this reflex you can trigger at your own sink, is not a human trick at all. It is a piece of equipment so old and so useful that it turns up, in one form or another, in every air-breathing animal with a backbone anyone has ever thought to test. The seal turned the dial to 10. Evolution turned it up in the Bajau, and in you it sits, unmodified, ordinary, waiting. You are not borrowing this from the seals. You and the seals are both borrowing it from some far older ancestor, some creature that first learned, hundreds of millions of years ago, that the smart thing to do when the cold water closes over your face is to go still and spend your oxygen wisely. Now let me bring this back from the wild ocean to a very human room, a bright one, a place none of us wants to find ourselves, because this is where the reflex stops being a curiosity and becomes something closer to a rescue. Picture a small child in a hospital, and the child's heart has done a frightening thing. It has begun to race, wildly, far too fast, 200 beats a minute or more, locked into a runaway rhythm that will not settle on its own. The doctors have a name for this. It is a kind of supraventricular tachycardia, a storm in the heart's electrical system, and it is exactly the sort of emergency where you might imagine the answer must be drugs or wires or a jolt of electricity. And sometimes it is. But there is a first thing to try, and it costs almost nothing, and it is this. You take a bag or a cloth filled with ice water, and you press it gently against the child's face for about 5 seconds. That is all. 5 seconds of cold against the face. And the racing heart so often simply stops racing. It drops back into its ordinary steady rhythm as though someone had quietly reached in and reset it. There was a study of this some years back following a small group of children, some of them only days old, some of them nearly grown, through many separate episodes of this dangerous fast rhythm. Nearly 30 times the storm arose, and nearly every single time 5 seconds of ice water on the face brought the heart home, all but one. That is not a folk remedy. That is not a wellness fashion. That is a technique the people who work in the sharp end of medicine reach for because it works, because the vagus nerve, given the right cold command, can overrule a heart that has forgotten how to behave. The same nerve, the same cold, the same brainstem arc I've been describing to you all night. Only here the stakes are a child's life, and the reflex answers anyway, faithful as ever, asking nothing in return. So consider what we have gathered, lying here in the dark. We have a reflex older than our species, shared with every breathing creature that has a spine. We have it dialed to an astonishing extreme in the animals of the freezing deep, and sculpted finer still in a seafaring people by the long hand of selection. We have it sitting in a hospital as a first line of defense against a heart in crisis. And we have it in you right now unused, needing no prescription and no ritual and no 15-minute wait. Needing only cold water and the right patch of skin. The whole apparatus of the morning cup, the grinding and the brewing and the waiting, and the slow chemical siege of a molecule that will collect its debt from you by evening, sits on one side of the scale, and on the other side sits a splash of cold water and a nerve you were born already knowing how to use. I keep calling it a switch, and I want to be careful with that word, because a switch sounds too simple, too much like a thing that is merely on or off. This is subtler than that. When you throw it, you do not shut yourself down. You do something far more interesting. You slow the heart and at the very same instant tighten the vessels at your edges and send the good rich blood inward, toward the brain, toward the heart itself, toward the parts of you that matter most in a hard moment. You become, for a little while, calm and sharp at once, quiet in the chest and clear in the head. That is not sedation. That is not the jittery false alertness of the cup. It is a third thing, an older thing, a state your body reserved for the moments it took most seriously, and it will hand it to you for the price of being briefly, deliberately cold. Let me take you into a hospital, into a quiet room where a small child is lying on a bed, and something is very wrong with that child's heart. It is not stopping. It is doing the opposite. It is running away. The heart has slipped into a rhythm called paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia, which is a long name for a simple frightening thing. The upper chambers have started firing far too fast, hundreds of beats a minute, faster than the pump can usefully fill and empty, and the little body is not getting the circulation it needs. Now, you might imagine that the answer to a runaway heart is some marvel of modern pharmacy, a drug pushed through a line, a machine wheeled in with paddles. And sometimes it is. But there is a first thing the physicians will often try before all of that, and I want you to sit with how strange it is. They fill a bag or a basin with ice water. They press it to the child's face for about 5 seconds. And very often, the heart simply remembers itself and drops back into its ordinary steady rhythm, as if someone had leaned over and quietly said, "That is enough now." I am not speaking loosely. There was a study done in the middle of the 1990s of 10 young patients, ranging in age from a newborn only 7 days old all the way up to a child of 15. Across these children there were 28 separate episodes of this racing rhythm, and the 5-second application of ice water to the face converted 27 of those 28 episodes back to a normal sinus rhythm. 27 out of 28. That is 96%. Think of what that number is telling you. It is telling you that the same trigger you could give yourself at a kitchen sink, cold water on the face, is potent enough, reliable enough, fast enough, that it earns a place in the treatment of a genuine cardiac emergency in a child. Not as folklore, as medicine. The people who deal with racing hearts for a living already know this trick. They keep it in the drawer right next to the serious drugs, because it works, and because it works in seconds, and because a nerve you were born with does not need to be prescribed. And here is what I find so lovely and so quietly humbling about that. The whole apparatus is already installed in you. Nobody has to teach the trigeminal nerve its job. Nobody has to instruct the vagus in how to lean on the sinoatrial node. The wiring was laid down long before you had a name, long before any of us had names, in ancestors who never breathed air the way we do. When the emergency physician presses that cold cloth to a newborn only a week into life, the reflex answers just as surely as it would in you or in me, because in the very young it answers even more readily than in the grown. Remember what we said earlier, that in an infant under 1 year, the cold on the face alone will bring out the full response, without the child having to hold its breath on purpose, without any cleverness at all. The baby does not know it is doing anything. The baby is simply built this way. We are all simply built this way. We just forgot. Now let me take you out of the hospital and down, way down under a cold sea, because if you want to see this reflex in its full glory, you have to look at the animals that live by it. Picture an elephant seal, a great heavy creature, hauling itself along a beach like a sack of wet sand, comical almost, until it slips into the water and becomes something else entirely, a diver of the deep, going down and down into the dark and the cold and the crushing pressure, and staying there for a long, long time on a single held breath. How does it manage? Part of the answer is in the very reflex we have been circling all this while, only turned up to a degree that would astonish you. On land, that seal's heart might tick along at something like 125 beats a minute. On an extended dive, it can let that heart fall all the way down to 10 beats a minute. 10. From 125 to 10. The pump nearly idling, the blood hoarded and rationed and sent only where it is desperately needed, the oxygen made to last far past anything you would think possible. And it is not only the slowing of the heart. That animal is carrying per pound of its body roughly 3 times the blood volume that you carry, and that blood is far richer in the molecules that grab and hold oxygen. The hemoglobin riding in the red cells, the myoglobin waiting in the muscle. So the seal is not merely turning the engine down. It has also packed itself with reserves, a great store of breath tucked away in the chemistry of its tissues, ready to be spent slowly through the long descent. Evolution took the same reflex you own and pressed it, over uncountable generations, into an instrument of the deep. The seal did not invent anything you lack. It refined, to an extraordinary edge, the very thing your face in your Vegas will do at a bathroom sink on a Tuesday morning. You do not have to go to the animals to see the refining either. It has happened in people, in our own species, within recorded history, in bodies not different from yours in any fundamental way. There are people in Southeast Asia, the Sama-Bajau, who have lived for a very long time as divers, spending hours of their days beneath the surface, gathering what the sea provides. And natural selection, which is patient and blind and never in a hurry, has been quietly at work on them. They have evolved larger spleens than most of us carry. Now, why on earth would the spleen matter to a diver? Here is the beautiful part. The spleen is a kind of warehouse for red blood cells. When the body goes short of oxygen, when the diving reflex takes hold, the spleen contracts, it squeezes itself down, and it pushes its stored red cells out into the circulation, and suddenly the blood is richer in the very carriers of oxygen right at the moment they are most needed. A bigger spleen means a bigger reserve to release. And this splenic squeeze is not some late afterthought in the sequence. It can begin even before the heart has slowed, an early move in the body's careful economy of breath. The Sama-Bajau, through nothing but the long sifting of generations at sea, have a deeper well to draw from, and a fiercer tightening of the vessels at their edges besides. Their bodies have been tuned toward the water. And the tuning was done to the same instrument you and I possess. I want you to hold those two pictures side by side for a moment, because there is a quiet lesson braided through them. The seal at 10 beats a minute in the black cold of the sea. The diver off a warm Pacific reef with a spleen enlarged by 10,000 years of ancestors going under. And then you, at your sink, cupping a little cold water to your face before the day begins. It is one reflex. It is the same reflex. The difference between you and the seal is not that you have some lesser machine. It is only a matter of degree, of how far each body has been pressed by the life it had to live. The switch itself, the trigeminal nerve reporting cold to the brainstem, the vagus carrying the answer back to the heart, the spleen and the vessels joining in, all of that architecture is common property, shared across the air-breathing creatures of this world, an inheritance so old that we cannot find its beginning. And that raises a question I have been circling and want now to press on directly. Why cold? Why does the temperature matter so much? You could wet your face with warm water and get almost nothing. Splash it cold and the whole cascade lights up. There must be something in the skin that is not merely feeling wetness, but is genuinely measuring temperature and reporting a number across a threshold. And there is. That is exactly what is happening. Down in the endings of the trigeminal nerve, in the skin of your face, there are tiny molecular gates, protein channels sitting in the membranes of the nerve fibers, and one family of them in particular has a most remarkable property. They are built to open when the cold comes on. Not when they are touched, not when they are pushed, when they are chilled. It is as though nature had installed, in the surface of your face, a small fleet of thermometers wired directly to the alarm bell, waiting all your life for the moment the water runs cold enough to trip them. Let me tell you about those gates, because they are, to my mind, one of the most elegant little machines in the whole body, and once you see how they work, you will never splash your face quite so thoughtlessly again. Picture one of these gates for a moment. It is a protein, a long chain of atoms folded into a shape, and it threads through the wall of the nerve, ending the way a grommet threads through canvas. In the middle of it there is a channel, a passage, and most of the time that passage is pinched shut. Nothing gets through. But this particular gate has a mood. It is sensitive to the jostling warmth of the molecules around it. When everything is warm, the shape sits closed, content, holding its passage tight. When the cold arrives, when the little molecules of your skin slow down and lose their fidget, the protein shifts its folds, the passage widens, and it lets a small river of charged particles come flooding in through the wall of the nerve. That family of gate is called, in the dry shorthand of the laboratory, TRPM8. I will just call it the cold gate, because that is what it is. It begins to stir when the temperature drops below about 25 degrees Celsius, which is to say, below the temperature of a mild room, below the warmth of your own resting skin. And here is the lovely thing. 25 degrees is not cold. It is barely cool. So this gate is not waiting for ice. It is waiting for a hint, the first suggestion of a chill, and it starts to speak the moment that suggestion crosses its little threshold. There is a second gate in the same neighborhood, a cousin, and this one is more stubborn. It keeps its mouth shut until the cold turns genuinely harsh, below about 17 degrees Celsius, the temperature where cool stops being pleasant and starts to bite. That one is called TRPA1, and you can think of it as the alarm for real, biting, dangerous cold, the kind that makes you gasp. So the face has two reporters, not one, a gentle one that notices the cool, and a severe one that notices the pain of the cold. Together they give the brainstem a reading, not just yes or no, but roughly how cold and roughly how fast it came on. That is why the water from the cold tap works so nicely. It sits down in the range where the gentle gate is wide open and the severe gate has just begun to stir. And it is also precisely why warm water does nothing at all. Splash your face with water at 30 degrees at body warmth, and the gate stays shut, the nerve stays quiet, and no alarm ever rings. The whole trick lives or dies on temperature, on an actual number crossing an actual line, and the gate is the thing that reads the number. Now, where do these gates live? Not just anywhere. They are built into a special kind of nerve fiber, the thin, bare, unhurried kind, the ones without the fatty insulation that the fast fibers wear. These are the small fibers of the trigeminal system, the great nerve of the face, and their cell bodies gather together in a little swelling called the trigeminal ganglion, tucked back near the base of the skull. So follow the path with me, slowly, because it is worth savoring. The cold water lands on your cheek, on your brow, around your eyes and the bridge of your nose, which is the most sensitive patch of all. The cold gate opens, charged particles pour in. That little inrush is enough to light the nerve fiber, to send a pulse racing back along it, up toward the ganglion, and onward, inward, into the brainstem itself. And it does all of this without asking you. You do not decide it, you do not think it. By the time you have the thought, "Oh, that is cold," the signal has already arrived, and the machinery downstream is already turning its gears. I want to dwell on that, because it is the part people rush past, and it is the most extraordinary part of the whole business. The signal does not go up to the thinking part of your brain to be considered. It does not travel to the great wrinkled cortex, the part that reads and worries and plans the day. It goes to the brainstem, the old part, the part you share with the duck and the seal and the newborn infant, the part that was running the show long before there was any cortex worth speaking of. The first stop inside is a cluster of cells with a grand Latin name, the nucleus tractus solitarius, the solitary tract nucleus, sitting in the medulla low down where the brain becomes the spinal cord. This little cluster is a switchboard for the body's automatic housekeeping, the place where reports about blood pressure and breathing and the state of the gut all come in to be sorted. The cold report arrives there. And from there, the switchboard throws a lever. It sends its answer along to another cluster nearby, the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus, which is the launching point for one of the most important nerves you possess, the vagus. What a nerve that is! Its name means the wanderer, and it wanders indeed, drifting down out of the skull, past the throat, down into the chest, laying its fingers on the heart and the lungs and the stomach, and much else besides. It is the great calming cable of the body, the main line of the branch we call the parasympathetic, the branch of rest and digestion and slowing down. And when the brainstem throws its lever, a command goes racing down the vagus, down toward the heart, to a small patch of specialized tissue in the upper corner of the right atrium called the sinoatrial node. That node is the heart's own metronome, the little clock that decides how fast the whole muscle beats. The vagus reaches it and whispers, "Slow down." And the heart, obedient, slows. Count the stops with me, because the elegance is in how few there are. Cold gate in the skin. Nerve fiber to the ganglion. Ganglion inward to the solitary nucleus. Solitary nucleus across to the vagus nucleus. Vagus down to the metronome of the heart. 5 stops, and not one of them is you. Not one of them is a thought, a choice, a decision. It is a reflex arc, a closed loop of wiring laid down before you were born, tested and proven across every air-breathing creature that has ever been dropped into cold water and watched. That is why it is fast. A thought is slow. A thought has to be assembled, considered, chosen. A reflex is already built. It is a groove the signal simply falls into, and a signal falling into a waiting groove moves at the speed of the nerve itself, which is to say, in the neighborhood of a heartbeat or two. Compare that gently to the lung road the coffee has to walk. The molecule of caffeine has to be swallowed, has to sit in the stomach, has to pass into the small intestine, has to be soaked up across the gut wall into the blood, has to ride the blood around the whole circuit of the body, has to arrive at last at the little vessels of the brain, has to slip across the barrier that guards the brain, and only then, only after all of that traveling, can it begin to sit down in the receptors and do its quiet work of blocking. 15 minutes on its very best morning. An hour or two before it truly hits its stride. The cold water skips every step of that journey. It does not travel through the blood at all. It sends a nerve pulse, and a nerve pulse is not a traveler, it is a rumor that spreads down a wire already strung. That is the whole difference. One is a parcel that must be carried across the country. The other is a bell rung at the end of a rope you are already holding. And notice what the reflex asks of the water, which is almost nothing. It does not need a special preparation. It does not need to be brewed or measured or timed against your waking. It needs only to be cold, cold enough to cross that 25-degree line, and it needs to land on the right patch of face, around the eyes and the nose, where the wanderer's cousin, the trigeminal, keeps its most sensitive endings. Cup your hands under the cold tap, lower your face, and you have supplied everything the machine requires. The gate does the reading, the ganglion does the relaying, the brainstem does the deciding, the vagus does the commanding, and your heart, without ever consulting you, eases off its pace like a runner who has crossed the line and finally lets the breath come slow. I called these gates thermometers a moment ago, and I want to defend that word, because it is not a loose one. A thermometer is a device that turns temperature into a signal you can read. Mercury climbing a tube, a needle swinging on a dial. The cold gate does exactly that. It turns temperature into a number of nerve pulses. Colder water, more pulses. Colder still, and the second gate joins in and adds its own harsher voice. The brainstem reads the total, the way you read the height of the mercury, and it answers in proportion. That is why the coldest water gives the deepest slowing, and why cool water gives only a gentle one. The body is not merely detecting cold. It is measuring it, quantity for quantity, and answering with a matching dose of calm. There is a precision in that which I find genuinely beautiful, the sort of thing you would be proud to have engineered, and here it is, given to you free, installed in the skin of your own face, waiting quietly your whole life for the moment you finally think to use it. Let me take you now into a room where this stops being a curiosity and becomes a matter of a heart that will not behave. Picture a small ward, the kind with a low bed and a rail, and in that bed a child whose heart has begun to race in a way that is not fear and not exercise. The upper chambers have started firing far too fast, a runaway drumming that doctors call a supraventricular tachycardia, and the pulse climbs to a rate the body cannot sustain for long. Now there are drugs for this. There are wires and shocks for this. But before any of that, a good clinician reaches for something you would never expect to see in a hospital. A basin. Cold water. Ice, if there is time to make the water colder still, and they lay a cold wet cloth across the child's face, or press a bag of ice water over the forehead and the cheeks and the bridge of the nose, and they hold it there for about 5 seconds. That is all. 5 seconds. I want you to sit with how strange that is. Here is medicine, with all its pharmacology, all its machinery, and the first thing it tries against a galloping heart is the same thing your face would feel if you leaned over a mountain stream and dipped your head. And it works. There was a study of children, some only a week old, some nearly grown, and across 28 separate episodes of this racing heart, the cold water on the face restored the normal steady rhythm in 27 of them. 27 out of 28. That is not a gentle nudge. That is a switch being thrown. The runaway drumming stops, and the slow, patient beat of the sinus node takes back command. And notice what the doctors are actually doing. They are not inventing a new force. They are borrowing the oldest reflex in the vertebrate body and aiming it at a problem. The cold gate in the face opens. The pulses run up the great sensory nerve of the face to the brainstem. The brainstem answers down the wandering nerve, the vagus, and the wandering nerve leans on the heart's own pacemaker and says, slower, slower. In a healthy person, that produces a pleasant, deep calm. In a child whose heart has lost its place in the music, that same command is enough to interrupt the runaway loop and let the proper rhythm reassert itself. The reflex does not know it is being used as a treatment. It simply does the only thing it has ever done. It reads the cold and answers with slowing. We just pointed at a heart that badly needs slowing. Think of what that tells us. A remedy that requires no needle, no prescription, no waiting for a molecule to cross the gut and ride the blood to the brain. It is present at birth. It works on the newborn as surely as on the teenager. And it costs nothing but water and a little cold. If you had never heard of it, and I told you there was a way to reach into the electrical rhythm of the heart from the outside, using only the temperature of the skin over the face, you would think I was selling you something. And yet here it is. Tested, written down, used in real wards on real children quietly for many years. Now hold that clinical picture in one hand, because I want to place beside it a set of numbers that to my mind finishes the argument we have been building all this long evening. You remember the trouble with coffee was never that it fails to wake you. It wakes you. The trouble was the company it keeps. The stress hormone that rises alongside it, the debt of sleepiness it lets accumulate behind the blocked receptors. The long tail of its half-life. So the honest question was never, does coffee do something? The question was, what else comes along for the ride, and in which direction does it push you? So some careful people did the obvious experiment. The one that lets the two rivals stand in the same room. They took a group of volunteers and put them through a deliberately stressful mental task, the kind designed in a laboratory to push the stress system upward. Arithmetic under pressure, a clock, a sense of being judged. And to half of them they applied a cold stimulus to the face during the ordeal, a cold near the freezing point of water, right down around 1 degree below the freezing mark. The other half faced the same ordeal with no cold. Then they measured the heart, and they measured the stress hormone cortisol in the blood. Here is what they found, and I will say it slowly because the two numbers deserve to be heard one after the other. In the group with no cold on the face, the group left to the stress alone, the cortisol climbed. On average, it rose by about 71% above where it started. 71%. The stress system did exactly what stress systems do. It poured its hormone into the blood. Now the group with the cold on the face went through the very same task, the same pressure, the same clock. And their cortisol rose by, on average, a little under 1%. 0.92%, to give the figure its full modesty, not 71. Under 1. The cold on the face very nearly erased the hormonal signature of the stress altogether, as though the ordeal had been happening to someone calm. Let that sit against what we learned about coffee. Coffee, at an ordinary dose, pushes the same hormone up by roughly 30% above a dummy pill. Up. The cold face holds it flat, or so close to flat it hardly matters, even in the teeth of a stressor built to raise it. So the two are not merely different in strength. They point in opposite directions. One raises the stress hormone, the other refuses to let it rise. If you wanted a single clean picture of why I have been so stubborn about this all night, that is the picture. The two things people imagine are cousins, two ways of feeling sharper, turn out to be walking away from each other. And the same study watched the heart do its part of the story. The slowing settling in, 20 to 27% down in the cold group during the hardest phases, while the untouched group's hearts ran upward by a quarter, a third, more, exactly as a frightened heart should. I called this the set of numbers that dismantles everything, and I meant it, though let me be fair, as I always try to be with an idea I am about to overturn. It is one study. The margins around those hormone figures are wide, the way they always are when you measure something as restless as a stress hormone in a small handful of people. I would never hang a whole science on a single afternoon in a single laboratory. But the direction of it agrees with everything else we have laid out. The seconds fast slowing, the wandering nerve, the ancient reflex the doctors trust with a child's racing heart. When the small, careful study points the same way as the biology and the clinic and the newborn, you begin to believe the arrow. And here is the part I find quietly funny. All of this, the flattened hormone, the slowed heart, the calm arriving in seconds, is not some rare gift handed to athletes or divers or the specially trained. It is the standard equipment. It came in the box. The very same wiring that lets a doctor stop a runaway heartbeat with a cloth of ice water is the wiring in your face right now, and mine, and the face of anyone listening as they drift towards sleep. The clinic did not build a new machine. It found the switch that was always there and learned exactly where to press. But if you want to see how far this ancient reflex can be pushed, how deep the slowing can go when a body has spent millions of years perfecting it, you must leave the ward and the coffee cup behind and go down. Down into cold, dark water, colder and darker than any basin, to meet the animals who did not merely inherit this reflex, but built their whole lives around it. Because what happens in your face for a few gentle beats, they do for the better part of an hour, in the black cold beneath the ice, on a single held breath, with a heart that slows not by a quarter, not by a third, but almost to stillness. And when you see the numbers those creatures reach, you will understand at last that the small cool splash on your own skin is only the faintest whisper of a machine that, in its fullest form, can hold a warm-blooded animal alive in a place that should, by every ordinary rule, have long since put it to sleep for good. Picture the water beneath the Antarctic ice. It is not blue the way a swimming pool is blue. It is the color of a closed eye, a deep and total dark, and the temperature hovers just above the point where salt water itself would rather become ice. Into that dark an elephant seal slides, without hurry, without any of the panic you or I would feel, and it begins to fall. Not to swim, exactly. To sink, on purpose, the way a stone sinks, saving every ounce of effort for later. And as it goes down, its heart, which a moment ago at the surface was beating something like 125 times a minute, begins to let go of that rhythm. It slows and keeps on slowing, past the numbers your heart reaches in deep sleep, past the numbers a doctor would frown at, down and down until, on the longest dives, it is beating as few as 10 times in a whole minute. 10. One soft thud, and then a long, long wait in the cold, and then another. A creature the size of a small automobile, alive and hunting in the black, running its great warm body on a heartbeat so slow you could almost count the seconds between each one on the fingers of your two hands. Now think about what that really means, because it is easy to hear a number and let it slide past. That heart is not failing. It is not sputtering toward its end. It is obeying. It has taken the very same command that your face obeys for a few gentle beats over a cold basin, and it has carried that command to a place your body would never dare to follow. The seal is not fighting the reflex. It has surrendered to it completely, and in that surrender it finds a kind of freedom that a fast heart could never buy. Because a heart beating 125 times a minute burns oxygen at a furious rate, and oxygen is the one thing you cannot carry enough of when you have shut the lid on the sky above you. So the animal does the only clever thing there is to do. It refuses to spend. It turns the great furnace of its heart down to a smolder, and it coasts. And the slowing of the heart is only the first trick in the bag. The blood itself is different. An elephant seal carries roughly 3 times as much blood, pound for pound, as you do. Think of that. If you could pour your own blood into a bucket, and then imagine a bucket 3 times as full, you would begin to see the reserve this animal swims with. And that blood is not the ordinary stuff either. It is crowded, thick with the molecules that grab and hold oxygen. There is far more hemoglobin, the carrier that rides inside the red cells of the blood, and there is far more myoglobin, its cousin, the one that waits inside the muscle itself, holding little private stores of oxygen right where the work gets done, so the muscle can keep going long after the blood has given up what it brought. The seal, you might say, does not merely hold its breath. It packs a great many breaths into its own flesh before it ever leaves the surface, and then it spends them slowly, one at a time in the dark, with the patience of something that has been doing this for millions of years. And here is the thing I want you to sit with, quietly, as the dark water closes over that animal in your mind. It did not learn any of this. No seal was ever taught to slow its heart. No mother seal sat her pup down and explained about oxygen and hemoglobin and the folly of spending too fast. The whole magnificent performance is written into the animal below the level of thought, in the same brainstem machinery you carry behind your own eyes, wired to the same cold-sensing nerve endings, routed through the same ancient wandering nerve that slows the beat. The difference between you and the seal is not a difference of kind. It is a difference of degree. The seal has simply had the volume turned all the way up, generation after generation, by the slow and patient hand that shapes all living things to fit the places they must live. You need not travel to the poles to see that hand at work on the diving reflex. You can watch it working, right now, on people. In the warm, scattered islands of Southeast Asia there live a seafaring people called the Samabajau, who have spent uncounted generations getting their living from beneath the waves, diving down on a single breath to gather what the seafloor offers, day after day, lifetime after lifetime. And the sea, being a hard and honest teacher, has been quietly rewriting them. The ones whose bodies handled the dive a little better tended to do a little better in life, and so, across the long, slow arithmetic of the generations, certain traits crept forward. Their spleens, for one, have grown larger than yours or mine. Now the spleen is an organ most of us never think about, tucked up under the ribs on the left, and it does a curious thing during a dive. It squeezes, it contracts, and as it contracts it wrings out a hidden reserve of red blood cells that it had been keeping in storage, and it pours them into the bloodstream just when they are needed most, when the oxygen is running low. It is a second fuel tank opened at the moment of greatest thirst. A larger spleen means a larger reserve, a bigger gulp of extra carrying capacity released into the blood at depth. And the Samabajau, through nothing but the slow selection of the ages, have grown themselves bigger tanks. Their bodies also close down the blood vessels of the limbs more fiercely than yours would, squeezing the outer flesh harder to keep the precious oxygen circling among the organs that truly cannot wait, the brain and the heart. It is the very same clamping of the peripheral vessels that stirs faintly in your own arms when you lower your face into the cold. In them it is turned up, sharpened, perfected by need. Here is a reflex you share with a seal, and here is a human people in whom that reflex has been evolving, measurably within our own species, shaped by a life spent holding the breath beneath the sea. And the spleen does not wait its turn politely. In some cases, its squeezing begins even before the heart has finished slowing, as though the body, sensing the plunge, reaches first for its reserve tank and only then eases off the throttle. The whole sequence has the feel of a well-drilled crew on a ship, each hand knowing its job, no one waiting to be told, everything happening at once and in the right order without a captain shouting a single command. The captain, remember, is not even consulted. The thinking part of the brain, the great wrinkled cortex we are so proud of, is left entirely out of it. All of this, the slowing heart, the clamping vessels, the ringing spleen, is run from the old brainstem. The part we share with the seal and the duck and very nearly everything else that breathes air and can find itself, now and then, with its face in the cold. There is one more small wonder in this family of facts, and it is the kind of thing that turns your ordinary assumptions gently on their head. You would suppose, wouldn't you, that a grown adult, strong and practiced, would show this reflex more powerfully than a helpless infant. And yet in the very young the opposite is nearer the truth. A baby under a year old need not even hold its breath on purpose. It has not the least idea how to hold a breath on purpose. But wet that small face with cool water and the reflex fires all on its own, complete, unbidden, the heart obediently slowing, the whole ancient program running without a single deliberate act. In you and me the fullest effect wants two ingredients together, the cold on the face and the breath held still. In the infant, the cold alone is enough. The machine comes fully assembled, switched on and ready, long before the mind that owns it has learned to tie a shoe or speak a word. It is, if you like, one of the oldest things about us. Older than our language, older than our cleverness, waiting in the wiring from the very first days of a life. So gather it all up now and hold it in your mind together, gently, the way you would hold something you did not want to wake. The seal in the black water with its heart at 10, the diving people with their great spleens and their tightened veins, the newborn slowing its heart at the touch of cool water without ever meaning to. All of them, and you, running the same old brainstem program, the same nerve carrying the same cold news to the same quiet switch, and every one of them doing in seconds what no swallowed molecule could ever manage, because this was never a chemical waiting to be absorbed and metabolized and carried by the blood. It was a message sent along a nerve at the speed a nerve can send it, which is to say, almost at once. That is the gulf we keep circling back to, and now that you have seen how far the reflex can reach, from the basin at your sink all the way down beneath the polar ice, the gulf looks wider than ever, and it is time to weigh, carefully and honestly, exactly what that speed is worth. So let us weigh it. Let us be fair to the coffee, because I have been rather rough on it, and it deserves a proper hearing before we close the book. What can a swallowed molecule do that a cold splash cannot? Well, it can last. That is the honest answer, and it is not a small one. The reflex at your sink is a flare in the dark. It flashes, it does its work in the first 30 seconds, the heart eases, the vessels tighten, the noise in the head drops away, and then, quietly, it fades. Your face warms. The little cold detectors in the nerve endings of your face, the ones that flip open below about 25 degrees Celsius, they close again as the warmth returns and the message stops being sent. The flare goes dark. Coffee does not go dark for hours. That 5-hour half-life I kept holding up as a burden, well, turn it over in your hand and it is also a gift. 1 cup, and the counterfeit key sits in the lock, patiently, for the better part of a working morning. No animal reflex gives you that. So if what you want is a long, steady chemical wakefulness, a thing that carries you from the first light through the middle of the day, then the coffee wins, and it wins easily, and no amount of cold water will replace it. But look closely at what you have actually bought with that steadiness. You have not bought wakefulness. You have bought a delay. The adenosine, the little molecule your own brain has been manufacturing all day as its patient countdown to sleep, that adenosine never stopped piling up. It piled up behind the blocked receptors the whole time the caffeine sat there. And the bill comes due. When the liver finishes its work and the counterfeit keys are cleared away, the whole backlog floods the locks at once, and you feel it, that heaviness in the early afternoon that sends people back to the pot for a second cup, and a third. You did not erase the tiredness. You borrowed against it, at interest. The cold splash borrows nothing. It changes no chemistry, blocks no receptor, leaves no debt. When it fades, it simply fades, and you are exactly where you were, only calmer for having passed through it. And there is the cortisol, which I cannot let you forget, because it is the strangest twist in the whole tale. Here are two things a tired person might do on a difficult morning, and they pull in opposite directions. The coffee, taken in that first half hour after waking, when your own stress hormone is already cresting on its natural morning tide, lifts that hormone higher still, about 30% above where it would sit without it. The cold water, in the careful trial where they chilled the face during a genuinely stressful task, held the same hormone almost perfectly flat, barely a whisker above baseline, while the people without the cold saw theirs climb by 70% and more. One nudges the body toward alarm, the other holds it in stillness. That is not a small difference of degree, that is a difference of direction. And it means the two are not really rivals doing the same job at different speeds. They are doing different jobs. The coffee is an accelerator, the splash is a brake, and a very old and reliable one. Now, which do you need? That is the whole question, and it does not have one answer, because it depends entirely on what has gone wrong inside you at the moment you reach for a remedy. If you are simply undercaffeinated, if the fatigue is the ordinary slow accumulation of a long day and you want fuel to keep going, then no splash of water will feed you and you should have your coffee and enjoy it. But if what has gone wrong is not fatigue at all, if it is that racing, jangling, overlit feeling of a nervous system that has been pushed too hard and cannot find the floor again, then coffee is the last thing you want, because you would be pressing the accelerator on a body that is already skidding. That is the moment the cold water was built for. That is the moment when a message sent down a nerve, faster than any drink could ever be absorbed, reaches the quiet switch in the brainstem and simply turns the engine down. The heart slows within seconds. The hormone stays flat. And you are handed, at no cost and no delay, a floor to stand on. I find something almost tender in the fact that this was never invented. Nobody designed it. It is not a technique or a trick that a clever person worked out. It is a piece of very ancient machinery that you are born already carrying. The same machinery the seal carries under the ice, the same the diving people sharpened over generations, the same the newborn used without the faintest idea it was using anything at all. The reflex does not care whether you understand it. The cortex, the great thinking cap of the brain, the part of you that worries and plans and lies awake, is not even consulted. The signal takes the low road straight through the brainstem, and the answer comes back before the thinking part has finished forming its question. There is a kind of mercy in that. On your very worst mornings, the part of you that is broken is exactly the part that does not get a vote. The switch is thrown below it, underneath it, in a place your troubles cannot reach. So the argument we began with, the one everyone treats as settled, that coffee is the way you reset a tired nervous system, turns out to be a confusion of two different things wearing one name. Coffee does not reset a nervous system. It overrides one, chemically, for a while, and then hands back the bill. The genuine reset, the fast one, the free one, the one that lowers the storm instead of shouting over it, was sitting in your cold tap the entire time, waiting on a nerve older than the whole idea of a beverage. I do not tell you this to make you throw out your morning cup. Keep it. I am rather fond of the ritual myself. I only want you to know that you were sold a single tool for two entirely different repairs, and that the second tool, the one for the jangling, overlit mornings, has been in your possession since before you were born, and it works in the time it takes to lean over a basin and let the cold news travel. Think of it, one last time, the way the whole animal kingdom seems to know it. A duck in a tub in London 200 years ago, its heart quietly falling as a puzzled man watched. A seal a mile down in freezing dark, its heart at 10, its blood 3 times richer than yours, gliding on a single held breath. A child on a hospital bed with a heart racing at a dangerous rate, and a folded cloth of ice water laid across the face, and the racing simply stopping, sinus rhythm restored almost every time. And you at your sink, in the gray light, one ordinary human, carrying the very same wiring as all of them, the same nerve in the face, the same relay in the medulla, the same wandering vagus reaching down to touch the heart and tell it gently to slow. It is the oldest calm there is. It costs nothing. It asks nothing of the thinking mind. And it is always, always there. So the next time the morning finds you frayed before it has even begun, and your hand drifts toward the pot out of pure habit, you might pause, just for a moment, and remember that the fastest way back into your own body does not have to be swallowed, or waited for, or paid back later with a crash. It only has to be felt. Cold water, a cupped pair of hands, one slow breath held over the basin, and a nerve doing in an instant what no chemical can hurry. And when you lift your face, dripping and quiet, the storm already lower than it was, you will have proven to yourself the one thing this whole long night of talking was ever really about, which is that the calm you keep searching for out in the world was, the entire time, wired into the front of your own face, waiting only for the cold to call it home.